I would like to preface by saying that I am a Roman Catholic who has experienced paranormal phenomena since I was 5. My late grandmother had experienced similar phenomena, and my mother and sisters also, but to a much lesser degree. As I get older, I notice the experiences are slightly more darker in nature. I know very little of demonology, other than what has been referenced in the Bible. I try to stay away from anything referencing demons, the devil, etc., which is why this experience was so difficult and I was not prepared. In October of 2018, I was admitted to the hospital due to an electrolyte imbalance. I was in a room with 3 other female patients. On my second night, my arms were finally free of the IV, so I was able to move around and assist the other women, who weren't as mobile, in getting ready for bed. One of the women was much older and cranky. She seemed to take an instant dislike to me when I first moved into the room, but warmed up to me after I helped her. When the lights went out, I decided to lay on my stomach and say my silent prayers. To the casual observer, it would have looked as if I was asleep. During this time, I could hear the woman that I helped argue with herself about me. She stated that I was nice, and then she replied to herself stating that I am not what I seem or something to that effect, and it went back and forth like that during my prayers. Shortly after, the room started getting really cold, really fast. I silently prayed to God to watch over her and free her from any negative influences. It was then that I heard her say these words very loudly. "I don't know the Lord's Prayer, and my name." I freaked out, quickly processing what had just happened. The woman knew that I was praying over her, and there was no way that she could have known that. In my mind, I instinctively knew that I was not up for the confrontation. I was weak and still recovering. I got up from my bed, and with my back to her, I said something like, "There is no way I can stay here now." To which she answered, "Yes, go." I won, and laughed really hard. I was amazed that the other 2 women had slept through it. It was around 10 p.m. when this occurred. The room was stiflingly cold at this point, and I ran to reception and asked to be discharged, but the charge nurse said that I couldn't leave without my doctor discharging me. I begged again to be discharged, but was denied, and the nurses tried to calm me as they got a hold of my doctor, who said that he would be in at 7 a.m. and that I needed to stay put. I asked to be relocated to another room in the interim, but the only available room was directly next door, and that was way too close for my liking, so they put me in the day room with a blanket and pillow. I used my phone to call my sister to get me out of the hospital. She works at another hospital, and told me the car wasn't home and to catch an Uber to her place. The ward was locked down for the evening though, so I couldn't leave anyway, and chose to just stay in the day room. The TV was on standby, but I could hear voices coming from it, even though the screen was blank. The voices talked about a shooting at the hospital I was in, with thousands of fatalities. It then talked about my baby nephew being in a plane that was shot down. By then, I was truly hysterical, as fear for my family took root and everything I learned went out the window. Throughout this time, the voices from the TV continued calling me names, etc. I couldn't stay any longer in the day room, and the nurses had me on a stretcher right in front of the main desk, where the charge nurse could see me. It felt like a really bad dream, and I was hysterical and paranoid. I laid down on the stretcher, and that's when I noticed hanging overhead the ward number 66. I was also on the 6th floor of the hospital. I wondered if that was why there was so much activity there. Not long after, I started hearing other voices coming from different rooms of the ward asking about me. They seemed to be communicating to each other and laughing. I started silently praying again with more conviction. A male patient in the ward nearest my stretcher started crying out for help, claiming that I was hurting him. I prayed even harder, citing the Lord's Prayer. He asked the nurse for the name of the lady outside hurting him, and she gave him my first name. He started crying again, joined by another voice 2 doors down. I prayed to know who they were in Jesus' name, and all these voices talked at once, but the one name that I could clearly make out was Beelzebub. I continued to pray throughout the first night as they taunted, laughed, cackled, and cried. At this point, the light in the man's hospital room was turned on as a nurse was with him trying to calm him down. I had been sitting up on my stretcher bed whilst praying, and watched his silhouette as he tried to inch his way to the open doorway. It was then that I noticed the odd shadow that he cast. It was so strange. It looked like a spiky-headed being with a dog. Spiky-headed in an almost cartoonish way like Bart Simpson. It continued until morning, and I was moved to a small private room awaiting the doctor. The voices were still verbally attacking and threatening me, but my hysteria was long gone by that point, and I was just determined to leave. I ended up discharging myself before the doctor arrived, but had to return as I still had the IV catheter in my arm. On my return, they placed me in another ward. I refused to go back to Ward 66, and I was allowed to recover in peace. And eventually, the mnemonic taunting stopped. I had a course of bad luck following that event. Basically, all of 2019 was a series of misfortunes and bad luck that still hasn't come right. I don't know what to do other than just keep moving on. I went to a psychiatrist last December who said that other than the trauma I would need their help with, I was in good mental health. This isn't a scary story per se, it's more eerie and odd. Just a disclaimer in case you're expecting otherwise. I met David 18 years ago when I was just 14. He was an idol for me when I first met him. He did so many fascinating things. He was a special effects artist on several television shows that were filmed in Miami, Chicago, and New Orleans. He was a sword/bladesmith, and he would render 3D images to help work on historically accurate swords for museums when the original couldn't be displayed due to research. He was amazing, and through all the years, he never lost his shine. When I was young, I wanted to be just like him. He told me very early on that he hated his name, and went by Monkey. This made me laugh so hard, as he imitated a monkey as he told me his name preference. To his best friends Heather, Keenan, Pixie, and myself, he wasn't just a person. He was a shining star. Skipping forward many years to 2015, I bought a house in New Orleans. I hadn't quite lost track of him, but I was in my own world because of a death in the family. In late 2016, we reconnected at a club outside of Chicago, and I invited him out to visit me in New Orleans. In spring of 2017, he took me up on that, and he flew down, and it was like no time had passed. He was still the same exact shining star that I remembered. Still the goofy monkey that I remembered. In 2018, I went back to Chicago to help with family, and he stayed in New Orleans. In 2019, I was touring with a band, and we had a stop in New Orleans, and I had found out that our friend Carter had passed away. It hit us both very hard, as Carter was in his early 30s just like me, but we were able to console each other. That was the last time that I saw Monkey, at a funeral. I had brought him a necklace that Carter had made, but I never got the chance to give it to him. We kept in contact over the phone after that, as I needed to get back to Chicago and he chose to stay in New Orleans. 2020, COVID started, and made it impossible to visit for a while. But that brings me to now. November 2nd for me, as I'm currently in the UK, but it was November 1st over there, with the time difference and all. I was woken up by a mutual friend ringing my phone off the hook at 5 a.m. UK time. I answered it, and they didn't give me much info, just that he was in an ambulance and that they needed to get in contact with his parents. Enter Heather again. I called her immediately, and she got everyone in contact. As I was starting to fall asleep again, she called me and let me know that he hadn't made it. I don't remember how I took it over the phone. I think I was just in shock and disbelief. Later that day, I went looking for his social media and it was all gone. None of us could find it. At some point that evening, I went scrolling through Instagram as one does. One of his deleted profiles popped up and I clicked on it. How it reactivated after his passing, I have no clue. Immediately, I was drawn to a photo of him, so I clicked on that. The caption was, "Very alive and very well. I hope the same for you." And I know that he was trying to reassure me by leading me to that photo. The photo itself was from 2018, but I had never seen it before. I don't believe in coincidence, so I am damn certain that this was his way of saying goodbye and telling me that he was okay, wherever he is. It still makes me cry, and it will for a while, but I appreciate the message from him. The profile disappeared again the very next day. It might seem mundane to some, but I could almost feel him in the room trying to comfort me. Rest in peace, David Mad Monkey. Those of us still on Earth miss you. My mom and I both work at a very old, very haunted hotel. We used to be incredibly open about our haunting experiences, but our current owner is a real jerk who refuses to acknowledge any of it, despite the business that it could bring in. So we no longer put it in the brochures or broadcast it in any way. But I guess it makes it all the more convincing when the guests tell us crazy stories, as they usually have no prior knowledge of the hauntings or even the history of this place. Which is a real shame, because the building has had some serious connections to incredible people who played a major part in founding the country. So a few weeks back, we were in the middle of our January lull. Every year during that month, a lot of us get laid off because we're not needed, so it's pretty quiet around here between the lack of both guests and employees. However, this night we did have 2 guests check in, both of whom were local, and they were celebrating a special occasion as the guy had flowers delivered to the room before they checked in. They went to the restaurant to eat dinner, and then went to their room shortly after 9 p.m. At 10:45 p.m., my mom was startled to see them standing at the front desk with their luggage, looking pale and terrified. They were very reluctant to tell my mom what had happened, but said that they wanted to check out now and not wait until morning. My mom has seen this look on guests' faces before and finally coaxed the truth out of the guy. Apparently, they had went to bed a bit after 10 o'clock, and half an hour later they shot awake to a great crash and the sound of glass breaking. They scrambled out of bed and flipped the light switch on, and could not believe what they saw. The massive, heavy glass lamp on the bedside table had been knocked off onto the floor, where it lay in pieces next to the alarm clock, as though someone had just taken their arm and swept the whole lot off in a rage. After seeing this, the couple grabbed their things and bolted from the room. When they were checking out, they were so embarrassed that they didn't even want a refund and refused my mom's offer to move them to another room, even though it would have been a huge upgrade. The woman just kept saying, "I just want to sleep in my own bed tonight." And the guy told my mom, "We may come back one day, but never again during the month of January when the hotel is nearly empty." My mom apologized as best she could for the craziness and checked them out, and she gave them a refund anyway since they had only used the room for a very short while. When they left, she and a coworker immediately went to view the room and found everything just as they described. While they were marveling at the strangeness of it all, a faint sound nearly scared them to death. It was the woman's cell phone vibrating under the sheets, where she had left it in their frenzy to escape. They grabbed the phone and headed back to the front desk, where they were met by the guy asking to come if they had found it. With his wife in the car waiting, he decided to open up a bit more to my mom about the incident, as his wife was already terrified, and he knew it would only make it worse for her. He said that before they fell asleep, he had an undeniable sense of dread, as if something were going to happen. And when the sound first woke him up, he looked toward the foot of the bed and saw the silhouette of his wife standing there. He asked if she was okay, and heard her voice answer right next to him. She was still in the bed. We've had people hear voices and music, see apparitions, and capture incredible images on camera, one of which was a young man dressed in colonial-era clothing, and you can see him clearly down to his hair and belt. But for someone or something to sweep a lamp and clock off of a table so hard that it breaks the lamp is very unusual. Our phenomena is very rarely of the physical variety, so I am not sure what to make of this. I myself have never been frightened of whatever is here, maybe because I'm a history lover and would almost welcome the prospect of seeing someone from such a long-gone era. As to who the woman was that this guy saw at the foot of his bed, I have no clue. We have a very well-known female spirit in the hotel, supposedly from the era when it was a Civil War hospital, but the building also served as an elite college for women and of course was a home when it was first built. It could have been anyone for all we know. In 1999, I moved back to Washington State after traveling around the country for 4 years. My grandmother let me move in with her for a while so that I could get back on my feet. I hated the basement of her house. Always have. But it was free rent and she was cool with Chuck, my 90-pound black lab. Plus, my Gramps and I got along pretty well. Late one night, about 3 months into me staying there, I woke up because Chuck kept moving around on the bed and was shaking the mattress. Then I heard him start grumping. You know, those grumpy groans that old dogs make when you scratch behind their ears and they love it. He started doing that. Once I realized what I was hearing, I sat up to yell at him to go back to sleep. That's when I discovered the reason that he was moving around so much. He was trying to get closer to the woman who was standing right next to my bed, scratching him behind the ear. I didn't scream, and I'm proud of that. But also, what the actual hell? Where did she come from? Who was she? Why was she standing in my room petting my dog at 3 a.m.? I was too afraid to ask. I did the only thing I knew how to in those situations. I hid under the blanket. Certainly she would be gone by the time I re-emerged from underneath it. That's how these things are supposed to work, right? I waited for a little while, but when I came out from under the blanket, she was still there. So I hid under there again 3 more times. Every time I came back out, she would still be there, smiling at me and scratching my dog's ears. The last time I was under the covers, I realized that I wasn't actually afraid of the woman. Chuck and I met under stressful situations for both of us, and because of that, he and I had a super strong bond. I trusted him implicitly. If she had meant me harm, he would have reacted to her negatively. But his reaction was clearly positive, so I figured that she probably wasn't there to kill me. So I came out from under the blanket one last time, intending to deal with the freaky woman still standing right next to me. Somehow I had decided that by turning on the light, it would make her disappear. I reached over and snapped on the bedside lamp. I don't know why I thought that that would work. Is that even a thing? Are ghosts supposed to disappear in the light? Well, I turned it on and she didn't, so I don't think it's a real thing. By then, she had been standing at my bedside petting Chuck for several minutes, and I was out of ghost-busting options, so I gave up on being terrified and just looked at her. Really looked at her. I can still see her right now in my mind, dressed up in a classy brown pantsuit with a cream-colored blouse. She had shoulder-length auburn hair styled beautifully with these big loopy curls. She looked like she had been on her way to work a party, and she had only stopped for a second to say hello. She was very pretty. She looked happy. I didn't have the nerve to talk to her, or at least I don't remember speaking. But I stayed present, and we both looked at each other for quite a while. I remember having the distinct impression of her knowing that I was there, of both of us being aware of the other. Then she stopped petting Chuck and walked to the end of my bed, stood up straight and proud, and dissolved away. I mean that very literally. First her clothes, then her skin, her organs, and her bones. Like that Nazi at the end of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. I remember what her blood looked like as it dissolved to reveal her skeleton. That should be a gross and terrifying memory, but I don't recall it like that. At the time, it felt like she was doing it on purpose. Like she had wanted to make the most dramatic exit that she could manage. I remember thinking, this should scare the pants off of me, but also, wow. Somehow, I did go back to sleep. In the morning, over coffee, I was going to tell my grandmother about what had happened, but she had just received an upsetting phone call. Apparently, her best friend from high school, Ursula, had passed away in the middle of the night. I'd heard stories about their teenage shenanigans, especially the one about the stolen birthday cake. But I never saw a picture of Ursula, so I asked what she looked like. I couldn't tell you what she looked like these days, but when she was young, she had the most beautiful curly auburn hair, is what my grandmother said. That's not the only weird thing that happened in my grandmother's basement, but it does remain the most vivid, without a doubt. I am and always was connected to spirits in some way. I'm Native American, which does contribute to my sensitivity to otherworldly experiences. This particular experience happened about 7 years ago. Growing up, I was a weird kid. In middle school, I was in the paranormal/ghost hunter phase, watching anything that had to do with ghosts and hauntings that I could. Down the road from my house was a big and decrepit house, which always gave me and my friends really weird vibes, like something was watching us as we would walk past. One day, me, my sister, and my friend were looking on the App Store for an app to keep us busy, a new thing to do that wasn't like what we did on a normal day. We found this app that claimed to pick up EVPs. We take the app to the house to test it out, being kind of skeptical. We sat up on the driveway asking questions. As we asked questions, to our surprise, we got answers. The app told us that the spirit was an 8-year-old boy named Shane who had died in a fire. This made us flip out, running down the road to my mom. She dismissed it since it was a free app on the Apple Store after all, so we dismissed it as well. A few years later, I was in class with a friend from high school, and for some reason we started talking about ghosts and paranormal encounters. This friend had moved into the house down the road after the years of it being renovated and ready for a new family. She went on about how she would hear noises in her house, and how she kept seeing a little boy. I instantly jump up at her saying this, and I asked her, "Is he blonde? Did he look like he was about 8 or 10? She raised her eyebrow, confused, but said, "Yeah, how do you know this?" This is where I explain what we did as kids, and how we didn't believe it, until she told me what she did. Apps like that are still skeptical to me, but I don't think the set of experiences were mere coincidences. To me, this is something more, and still sends a bit of a shiver down my spine to this day. I'm a sheriff's deputy in a fairly busy county. Along with this job comes the unfortunate familiarity with what a decomposing human body smells like. To me, it's very similar to an animal carcass, but with a much sweeter odor. Not sweet in the sense that I enjoy it, hell no. That smell normally means a bad night for me and another gruesome memory to add to my catalog of things that I would rather forget. With that out of the way, I'll get to what happened. Last night I was patrolling a geographically isolated area of the county which is very large and sparsely populated. Having completed the hour-long trek to the northwestern county line, I began driving through the mountains back toward civilization. About 25 miles from town, or the closest semblance thereof, I hit a straight stretch of highway through a wide valley. Since the weather was nice, I had my windows rolled down. As I passed the entrance of an old logging road, that familiar smell of sweet rot suddenly filled my car. Not just a whiff, a cloud of it filled the cab as if there was a week-old human corpse sitting in the front seat next to me. It was all too familiar, but this time, there was something else that I couldn't quite place. It lingered for a few moments, then went out just as quickly as it had entered. Realizing what I had just smelled, my heart sank and I pulled to the side of the road. I told myself that it was just a dead animal in the ditch, and that my mind was playing tricks on me. I turned my car around and drove slowly back toward the logging road. The closer I got to it, the smell became stronger, and I grew more certain that I was indeed about to find a body. Holding on to a shred of hope that I was wrong, I parked my unit on the side of the highway just before the dirt road. I radioed to dispatch, told them my location, and that I would be out of my unit for a moment. I didn't say why to avoid an awkward disregard on a possible body on the side of the road. I shined my flashlight into the ditch and into the encroaching briars and weeds as I walked closer to where I believed the source of the smell was. Once I was a few yards away from the dirt road, I saw the opening of a concrete culvert going under the highway. At this point, the smell was nearly as strong as it was when I had first passed. The opening of the culvert was about 3 feet in diameter, just large enough to hide a body inside. I cursed and held my breath as I leaned over and shined my light in there. It was just an empty tunnel stretching the width of the highway. Somewhat relieved, I stood and looked around. It smelled as if I was standing on top of whatever was emitting the odor. I searched around the brush for a moment, but found nothing. Thinking the origin might be on the opposite side of the highway, I crossed to the other ditch to continue searching. As I walked away from the other side of the road, the smell grew faint. I stopped at the opposite end of the culvert and peeked inside just to double check. The odor was nearly gone at this point. I stood up and checked my surroundings when I heard a crack in the bush behind me, and the smell engulfed me and was even stronger than before. Thinking for a moment that the wind must have shifted, I froze when I realized that the air was dead still. Whether it was fear or something else, a shiver went down my spine. In the distance, I saw headlights coming down the highway. As the car came near, the odor seemed to move away further into the bushes toward where I had heard the crack. The car stopped, and the passenger rolled down the window and asked if I was all right. I lied and told him that I was. I thanked him for checking and walked briskly back to my car as they drove away. Then I got the heck away from there. Once I was able to get cell service, I called my friend who was patrolling the opposite side of the county. I explained what had happened, trying not to let on that I was spooked. Once I was done, he paused for a moment, then asked about the unusual hint of something which accompanied the smell. He asked if it was sulfur, and I put 2 and 2 together. It was sulfur that I had smelled. I asked if he thought that I had found a demon in the middle of nowhere, to which he simply responded with a concerned yes. A little background on this guy. He is the son of a missionary and has been around the world. He has seen, rather smelled this before, and told me that it was a very concerning experience. This spooked me even more because his responses were very out of character for him. There's always the chance of a very scientific explanation, and I hope that one is out there. In June of 2016, my mother died of cancer. 5 of my 6 siblings and I were fortunate enough to make the trip to the small town of Harper, Texas, to be with her in her final days. If you've ever been to Harper or have driven through, you know that there's not much to it. With a population just shy of 1,100 people, 1 restaurant, and 1 stoplight, it could be more accurately described as a rest stop along US Highway 290. To keep my sanity during the trip, rather than stay in my mother's tiny and now very overcrowded house, I opted to stay at a hotel in nearby Fredericksburg, about 25 miles away. For the next 2 weeks, I made the drive daily to spend time with my family, making the most of that time that we had left with our mother. One by one, my siblings and I eventually had to return to our normal lives, although 1 brother and sister would stay with our mother until she passed. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, leaving my mother and knowing full well that I would not get to see her again in this plane of existence. I had a very early morning check-in time for my car rental and flight back to California. Since I would need to get up at 3 a.m. to drive the 85 miles to San Antonio, I felt it prudent to get back to my hotel in Fredericksburg and try to get some sleep before departure. Sleep did not come easily. Although I was tired and emotionally drained, it was still very early in the evening. After what seemed like an eternity of tossing and turning, I finally managed to doze off and slept for a few hours, until it happened. I awoke suddenly and opened my eyes wide, but did not try to move from the position in which I lay. I felt an unmistakable presence with me in the room, like someone had been standing in front of my bed and watching me. I slowly peeled back the comforter from my head, and still trying not to move, mustered whatever courage I had at that moment, and looked. At the foot of the bed, I saw a dark silhouette appearing to just stand there. Considering my emotional state at that moment, I quite literally said out loud, "Oh hell no," and just pulled the comforter back over my head, knowing the next time I looked, whatever it was I thought I saw standing there would be gone. What happened next was one of those moments that stay with you for a lifetime. As I lay there with my head covered, I held my breath momentarily and just listened. Seconds later, I felt someone sitting down on the foot of the bed. I could feel the bed shift slightly, and the weight of the comforter on my legs got significantly heavier. I remember being upright at that moment, throwing the covers off of me and saying, nope, no way." I got out of bed and now paced the floor, trying to both calm and reassure myself that I was in fact the only one in the room. I looked at the clock and saw that it was just after midnight, and then made the obvious choice that I would stay awake for the next few hours before checking out of the hotel and driving to the airport. I opened the mini fridge and found an energy drink, then turned on the TV and texted my wife about what I had just experienced. At 3 a.m., I was at the hotel front desk to check out and settle my bill. The night auditor was a very nice young lady who had greeted me with a smile, commented on my very early departure, and asked if I had gotten enough sleep. I shook my head and proceeded to tell her what had happened to me in my room earlier that night, still a little freaked out. Her expression now more serious, the auditor leaned forward and said in a lowered tone that she knew that the hotel was haunted. In the dead of night, she would hear children running up and down the hall, look, but see no one there. Chairs would slide across the floor in the nearby dining room, making an unmistakable sound she said she heard quite often. I paid my bill, thanked her for sharing her experiences in the haunted hotel, and was soon on the highway driving to the airport, homeward bound. I have experienced many paranormal occurrences at my own home, but never while traveling. Unfortunately, my dad died earlier this year, and the way he died was terrible, in which my whole family has to go to therapy. Yet, I still miss him and love him always. To get into the experience, I've moved around a lot this year due to personal problems since my dad's passing. I also got 2 puppies this year from the same litter. Lost my dad and dog on the same day. Kinda like a replacement for the 2 loved ones that I did lose. One of the dogs was quiet and usually pretty chill, except that he had these moments where he would start staring at a wall or something in the room randomly, when he wouldn't normally do this. I know that dogs have a 6th sense about paranormal stuff, as well as cats and other animals. This behavior would happen about each month, around 2 to 3 times, since I got him in May. Then I moved again to my godfather's house, which he's my dad's older brother. There are still some tense feelings here and there because it's a very sensitive topic for my godparents and dad's side of the family to talk about my dad, or even to see videos or pictures of him. Around the same time I started my new job, where it would require me waking up at 2, 3, sometimes 4 in the morning to leave for work. In front of my room, there'd be like a tiny light that's usually on sometimes when people forget to turn it off. There's nothing in the way of that light that could ever cause a shadow. One day I was leaving for work. It was about a week ago. I go to get my shoes, and I'm about to leave through the front door when I look up, and in front of the light, there is a shadow of a person. I immediately recognized who it was. It was my dad. The only reason I know him is because of his shoulders and height. I looked and saw his big shoulders and his head. I blinked, and then it went away. I closed the door to the house and went to my car. Until about 10 minutes later, it hit me again that I had just seen my father. I think I cried about it after work, but I couldn't tell anyone for fear of them thinking that I've lost my mind. I believe in the paranormal, but am skeptical about most of the stories that people tell. It's extremely hard to distinguish between a fabricated story and a true story when you can't see facial expressions or hear changes in a person's voice. About a week ago, I was sitting in my kitchen browsing the web, probably Reddit, on my phone. My kids had been asleep for about an hour, and my wife was in our room finishing up a paper for work. There wasn't a radio or television on. While browsing in complete silence, I heard my wife cough several times. The cough sounded as if she had breathed in some water and was trying to get it out of her lungs. Jokingly, I jumped out of my chair and ran over to the room where she was sitting. I started patting her back and pulling her earlobes down, again in a joking manner. She looked at me like, "What the hell?" So I told her I was trying to help since she had coughed so hard. She, still with the what the hell face, looked at me and said that she hadn't coughed. I stood there and evaluated what I may have heard. I thought it might have been one of my kids, but the cough was from a woman. It wasn't a 4-year-old or 1-year-old girl's cough. Other things about this cough is that it came from inside the house. It was the type of hack like after water goes down the wrong pipe. It was one succession of coughs, about 4 of them together. How did the coughing not continue if the coughs were heard that hard at the beginning? It didn't and still does not make sense. But that's not the only thing that happened. Fast forward to the next morning. My kids are awake and eating in the kitchen. I'm in the living room watching TV, still waking and drinking coffee, and my wife is in our room getting ready for the day. All electronics are off except the TV and our phones. My wife's phone rings from what sounds like the kitchen area. She runs to the kitchen to answer it because she was expecting an important phone call from work. She searches for her phone in the kitchen, but does not find it. She asks if it was my phone that rang, but I told her no. My phone was in my pocket. Turns out both my wife's work phone and personal phone are in our room on the other side of the house. We checked the kitchen and surrounding rooms for anything that could have made the ring, but we found nothing. I don't know the name of the ringtone, but it's a very common ringtone for iPhones. My wife and I searched for the reasoning of why we clearly heard a phone ring in the kitchen, but no matter how hard we tried, we were unable to find a logical explanation. I was going to write it off as just another weird coincidence, but I kept thinking of how clear the phone ringing was, and how my wife had heard it too. Add this one to the cough that I heard the night before, and I start to worry that there may be an intruder in my attic. I think, nah, not possible. But I have 2 little girls and a little boy too. It's a slim chance, but I'd feel better if I just went up there and checked. I texted my wife to watch the kids because I was worried that there might be an intruder. I didn't want to verbalize it because if they were up there, then they would hear me. I check outside and around the house first for any signs of a person being on the roof, or anything like that. I look for cuts in the wall, and see no signs of intrusion whatsoever. I then grab the ladder to get inside the attic. The only way into this attic is through a small 2x4-foot opening at the top of the interior of a closet in one of the rooms. I grab my flashlight and my gun, set the ladder up, and plan on entering the attic as quickly and tactfully as possible. I don't want the intruder to be lying in wait. I push the drywall that blocks the opening and can hear a door swing and shut. I say swing because it sounded like a door that was on a hinge or hinges. I can't get the drywall off, and the element of surprise is now gone. I push through anyway and inspect the attic. The attic has no floorboards. You have to navigate through it by standing on the supporting beams. It's extremely annoying to have to go up there to do housework. I find no signs of anyone being up there, no entry points, and again, no cuts in any of the walls. I come down and double check that my wife and kids had stayed in the living room like I had asked in case there was an intruder. She confirms that they were, and that no door had been shut. I pretty much already knew that the door shutting wasn't them because the sound came from the attic, but there's no door in the attic. I went through a checklist of explanations to the cough, the phone ring, and the door shutting, and again, have yet to encounter a single one that makes sense. I know it sounds weird, but a freaking portal is what I'm coming up with. I lived in this house for years, and have always heard weird noises, but never something like this. Most portal stories I've heard sound totally far-fetched. Usually a portal story includes a demon, or something spiritual, but this was just totally random. People crossing dimensions to hang out in my attic? There's no malice, no sightings, no physical evidence, but the sounds were definitely heard and are inexplicable. Something else happened a few nights ago. It was around 11 p.m. I'm asleep in bed and am woken up to my wife shaking me. She tells me that she heard a door close. I say to her that it may be our 4-year-old, but she says she was watching the monitor and the cameras were on the kids. She said that she had been watching the monitor because she had been hearing weird noises. I say maybe it's just the house creaking. She claims that she heard the windows shake. Now this is significant to me because we do have some old windows. The difference between the old and new windows is that the old windows will rattle when a door is shut due to air pressure or when the house is shaking, earthquakes, and the new windows won't. So she heard a door close and the windows shake. That's enough for me to grab my gun and check for an intruder yet again. I do an interior and exterior check and of course find nothing. I go back to bed and once again conclude that there is a portal in my house. We used to have a chair sitting in my parents' closet. It was one of those old straw ones that felt like it was going to fall apart every time you sat on it. My sister was born first, and almost every night she would stand in her crib pointing at the wall. At first, my parents had no idea what was going on, until they found out the direction she was pointing was where my parents' closet was with the chair. The same thing happened over and over until I was born 4 years later. I got the room that my sister had been in. I was 1, and when my parents saw me one night, I was doing the exact same thing, pointing at the same spot that my sister had. Time went on and nothing happened concerning the chair. One day my parents went into their closet and found written in crayon the name Sue. My parents have never seen this before. After that, nothing else happened. The chair started to take up space, so my mom decided to take it to the place where she used to work. Our good friend had that class now, and it was all hers. It was a 5th grade science class. After about a month, my mom got a text that Sue was doing things. She said that Sue was dumping stuff off of shelves and throwing things. She said that Sue took a liking to one of her kids and messed with his hair and threw stuff directly at him. That was the last time we ever heard anything about Sue. I would definitely like to go back to see if she's still there. There was one time I was staying at a hotel in Madrid, not too far from the airport, and by the time my buddy and I arrived there, it was 11 p.m. I had completely messed up the booking information because I forgot that we were losing a day by traveling from California. Since my buddy and I had arrived to the hotel so late, we were exhausted. Still, we were given our room number, a card, and sent up to our room. I noticed that the more turns we made down a hallway, the less lights worked. By the time we reached our room door, it was dark and scary. I didn't want to say anything, implying that I was feeling uneasy about the room because I was 24 at the time, so I had to be tough, and my buddy was 27. Once we opened the door, the room was bright and looked very modern. I felt a whole lot better upon entry. The room was supposed to have 2 full-size beds, but for some reason they were pushed together to make a giant bed. My buddy and I agreed it wasn't a big deal, just to stay on our sides of it and deal with it until tomorrow when we weren't so tired. I slept on the left, and he slept on the right. Sometime between 1 and 4 a.m., when it was very dark in the room, I woke up and saw a man standing in the corner. I knew for sure that the man wasn't my friend. My buddy Cody is 6'2", 195 pounds. The guy standing in the corner looked about 5'10", 180. This was the first and only time I ever experienced sleep paralysis. I remember staring at the guy, who appeared to have his back to me, facing the corner of the room closest to me, as if he was counting for a game of hide and seek. I stared at my arm hanging off the bed to the left, and focused all of my energy and strength to move it, but I could not. I tried to scream for Cody to wake up so that at least he would know of the man in our room, but no sound would come out of my mouth. I've never panicked so hard in my life, and before I knew it, my eyes closed, and I was unconscious again. It wasn't until 7:30 a.m. that I woke up and screamed Cody's name and hit him. It was as if everything I tried to do during the night suddenly came out all at once. He woke up startled, of course, as I came to the realization that everything was okay. The order of everything I'm about to say next is how I knew that there was a ghost in that room. I told Cody, dude, I just freaked out. It's just that last night, and before I was able to finish my sentence, Cody said, "Did you see that guy in the corner?" My jaw dropped as he told me he experienced the exact same thing as I had the night before. He had sleep paralysis and couldn't move as he stared at that man. We had all of our belongings still, and nothing was changed about the room. It still scares me when I think about it until this day. How we could never explain what happened that night, or how we both experienced the same thing. Cody ended up experiencing another ghost in a hostel that we stayed at one time. But as for me, that was the only ghost experience I ever had while traveling. This paranormal encounter took place at the hotel I worked at last year. I was 20 years old, working at a small mom-and-pop hotel in Ontario, California. I had worked there for some time before I started to stay there for a few months. The owner taught me everything that I needed to know so that I can run his business while he went on a business trip to Africa. Mind you, I didn't have a car, so my only option was to stay there and work around the clock if need be. I didn't have to pay for the room, and I got to wash my clothes in the laundry room. There was a grocery store in walking distance, and restaurants all around me where I could get food at a discounted price since I worked at the hotel. I thought this was a sweet deal. One night, my boyfriend came down to visit, and while he was in the bathroom, I heard banging coming from the room next to ours. Then, I heard scratching on my walls. I told him to stop playing, and he didn't even know what I was talking about. The banging continued all night, so I called the front desk and told them that the people next to me were loud and that I had to be up at 6 to go down there to work. She was quiet for a moment, and then she told me that she hadn't rented out the room next to mine. Mind you, I had an end room. I quickly ran outside to see if the curtains were open or closed, and they were open. I could see right into that room, and no one was there. I had never been so creeped out in all my life. I decided to sage the room to get rid of any bad spirits or energy, and that worked for a while, until it didn't. The next time, something demonic happened. I was asleep and kept hearing whispers in my sleep. I hate whispers with a passion, and they creep me out to the fullest. So I sat up in bed and I was looking around the dark room, and in the corner of the room, I saw white, glowing eyes staring at me. I felt frozen by its glare. I could see its body and saw that it was crouched down, holding its knees. Then I saw more shadows appearing closer and closer. I went to turn on the lamp next to the bed, and it didn't cut on. So my next thought was that I needed to run outside and get to safety. It took all the balls in the world for me to get up and do that. I was so scared that I couldn't even feel my legs. All I could feel was the cold, wooden floor beneath me. I got to the door and flung it open, only to see that the bedroom curtains were on the outside of my room's window. The sky was black, and the clouds were a dark green with gray tint. I was mortified to realize that I was still asleep, and that I hadn't actually woken up. I looked back inside the hotel room and saw myself asleep in the bed. I screamed bloody murder, and that's when I jolted awake for real. I said a prayer and went back to sleep. The encounter that followed was even worse. Yet again, I could hear things in my sleep. I was terrified and couldn't move any part of my body. I began to pray in my head as loud as I could, only to wake and feel my body slam on the bed as if I had been levitating. I called my grandma the next day, and she said that it was a demonic attack. I got my car shortly after a few days later, and never stayed in that hotel again. Yesterday, I took the day off of work to do a bunch of chores around the house, so I was home alone. One of the things I had to do was turn in our old cable equipment and DSL router, get new equipment, and install it. My house was built in the early 1950s, that is, the upstairs part. We have a downstairs part that's a new addition built sometime in the early 2000s. I only mention this so that you can understand that the upstairs of the house is a raised foundation with wooden floors throughout. The new addition is downstairs on concrete foundation. Upstairs, you can hear the footsteps of someone walking around with shoes on their feet. Downstairs, it's a little harder to hear because there's carpeting and it's on concrete, so if someone was running across the house on the upstairs older part, it's loud and echoey. Yesterday, as I said, I was home alone. It was early in the afternoon. I was downstairs installing the new router on the very far corner of the downstairs part of the house. As I was laying on the floor trying to locate the cables and put them in the right places, I heard loud running coming from the upstairs in the older part of the house. It's not possible that someone had come in and then left, because all the doors and windows have sensors that make a chime when a door or window is open. I did not hear a chime, and no one who lived in the house should have been home. My wife was at work, and my son was at school. I quickly got up and did my best to listen to see if there really was someone in the house. I went to check and looked through each bedroom, through the kitchen, through the bathrooms. The front door was locked, and there's no way that anyone could have entered the house or run through it and left, as I said. I don't know what I heard, but it was definitely heavy footsteps, even though it was empty. Back in October, I decided to treat my girlfriend to a night away at a popular British seaside town. The town is one of those historical areas, which has its fair share of ghost legends and gothic tourism, so there was lots of touristy attractions such as ghost walks, which me and my girlfriend decided to go on. A bit of background information about the hotel. It is regarded as one of the oldest hotels in the town and is also a popular tavern among the locals. The inn itself had a rather creepy feel to it, but our room was modern and comfortable. The last place you'd imagine paranormal activity to occur. We set off on the ghost walk with a local guide who knew about the paranormal hotspots. Unexpectedly at the time, we stopped directly outside our hotel. "This is the most haunted hotel in town. Good luck if you're staying here," he cackled. He proceeded to tell us that there was a number of spirits that haunted the building, and guests frequently experienced sightings and unexpected things. However, at the time, we were a bit drunk from dinner, and we brushed off the walk as your typical tourist trap. We went to bed without any issues at all. I woke up later that night, paralyzed, and with a sense of unease. I felt what I would describe as a strong, cold gale blowing around the room. Imagine being outside in strong, windy weather. The sensation lasted for, I would say, about 15 seconds when it suddenly stopped and the room filled with a warm, relaxed sensation once again. I woke my girlfriend to tell her, and she brushed it off, saying it was probably sleep paralysis and a draft, so I believed her and went back to sleep. I thought nothing of it until we checked out. The receptionist asked us how our stay was and if there had been any issues. Everything was perfect, but there was a really big draft in the room, I exclaimed, as you would. Surprisingly, she casually laughed. No, that's not a draft. It's just a spiritual presence in the room. It happens all the time in that one, she casually reassured us. Now I'm really interested in the paranormal, so I asked about the stuff in the hotel. She told us that everything the guy told us on the walk was indeed true, and the spirits are those of old landlords and locals whom help run the hotel and keep the guests safe. She told me lots of stories of how guests would stumble on the stairs and be caught by an unseen presence, as well as children's lost toys showing up right at the moment where they're about to start crying. She even told us that one of the past landlady's spirits acts as a bouncer, causing troublemaking and aggressive guests to feel ill enough to leave. The receptionist seemed really happy and was used to the paranormal activity in the hotel and says that she regularly sleeps alone in the rooms without any worry. Obviously, this isn't that much of a scary ghost story, but more of an interesting experience. I would definitely go back for another stay in that hotel. I live in a small town, and things like rumors tend to spread pretty quickly since folks around here are incredibly nosy beings. The most trusted source of these rumors is the local bar located in the center of the small settlement that we live in, which my father visits frequently. It is right by the school that I go to. Anyway, 2 weeks before all this bullcrap started, he came back with quite the story. It is said that something off has been going on with our town's graveyard, which is right by these creepy old woods a little bit away from the town itself. Usually takes 20 minutes to get there by car. Apparently, drunkards there claim that there's a medium disguised as a homeless man hanging around the woods surrounding the graveyard, and that sometimes he can even be found by the graves eating bread. At first, I didn't believe it, so me and my friend decided to walk to the graveyard and hang around there trying to find that guy. So we did, and the graveyard was full of people for a few hours, but the normal kind of people. A few more hours passed, and soon there was no one left except for an old, bearded man on the bench by the football field across the woods in the parking lot. He was looking at empty plastic bags with a box of cigarettes resting beside him. Nothing suspicious. My friend had the guts to walk up to him and insult him. I walked away from her, but when she crossed the line, I pulled her away, telling her that he may be a serial killer or a crazy drug addict. But he remained quiet until she yanked her hand away from mine, grabbed his box of cigarettes, and crushed it under her feet. She also threatened to hurt him if he didn't speak, and that's when he stood up and looked her dead in the eyes, and he was much taller than her too. He told her something along the lines of, "You are a disgrace in the eyes of God," and walked away onto the road until we lost track of him. I started to worry, and told her that maybe he was a priest or a monk and now was going to tell everyone in our town how she had mocked him, and I was actually afraid. She reassured me that he was none of these things because he had cigarettes with him, but I think those weren't even his. That night I slept over at her house because I was scared to go back to mine alone. I woke up in the middle of the night, and since I was sleeping in the same bed with her, I had a clear view of the pitch-black shadow of a man standing over her right beside her bed, his palm on her wrist. I raised my body, getting ready to stand up, but he turned his head to me and started to shake it from left to right, so I figured it was a lucid dream and rolled over to the other side, drifting back to sleep. The next morning, she looked pale and ghostly, and I asked her if she got enough rest. She informed me that she did not even sleep and kept having problems with her breathing and her heartbeat. I was so scared that I almost pissed myself right there and then, and as of now, I am home alone and feeling like I am being watched. About 2 years ago, I visited the Auschwitz concentration camp with my parents. At one point, I separated from them because they are always slow while sightseeing. I entered the room that I later found out was used for torturing prisoners. Generally, throughout Auschwitz, I was feeling an overwhelming sadness, but I felt really strange in there. Sadness, helplessness, and apathy all mixed together. Then I heard a woman's voice singing. I was alone, and there were no speakers. I left this room and immediately stopped hearing that voice. When I returned to the room, the singing started up again, and I was still alone. I stayed there feeling an overwhelming sadness still, until my mother joined me. Then the singing stopped altogether. Unfortunately, I don't recall what she was singing about, just that the song and the whole vibe of the place carried this incredible, intense melancholy. This memory still haunts me to this day. I was staying at an old hotel by the beach when I was around 8 or 9. It had a reputation for being an extremely haunted location around the eastern coast of Florida. The hotel I'm referring to is the Plaza, a 100-year-old hotel on the coastline. At one point, I went down to the lobby to get some utensils for room service. There was a clear door leading to the closed bar area. You were basically looking at the end of the serving counter when you peered in, with chairs on the side and a small beer keg at the end. It was very dark inside the room, and since the door was locked, I could only peek in through the glass. I inspected the room for about 10 seconds. Suddenly, I was looking at one of the chairs. It had a giant dent on the right rear leg. Then, suddenly, it flew backward and toppled over. I was so scared that I fell to the ground, and as soon as I landed, I heard what sounded like a woman screaming from the floor above, or possibly the second floor, as this was on the ground floor. It was quite possibly the strangest and most terrifying scream I have ever heard. It lasted about 4 seconds, and sounded like an old woman mixed with a lion, kind of. Again, this was around the time when I was 8 or 9, and seeing as how I am now 23, the memory has become slightly vague. In the home where I lived from ages 8 to 16, I would always hear church bells ringing early in the morning. My sister, who shared a room with me, said that she heard them as well, and this was before I ever mentioned them to her, so I know that it wasn't my imagination playing tricks on me. I never even thought it was weird until I was in my early teens when I realized that we don't live near any churches, or at least not any active churches. I was so used to it that I'd never really even taken the time to actually consider it. When I brought it up to my mom, she had no clue what I was talking about. It was the same with my next-door neighbors and other friends from the neighborhood. I'm an actor at a haunted attraction in Pennsylvania. I was playing Jason on the hayride scene tonight. I hop up on the hayride and walk up and down the middle of it and scare people, This is my second year doing it, and I absolutely love this gig. But tonight, something happened that I couldn't explain. It was the second to last wagon of the evening. I was in the middle of the wagon, headed toward the front, when I got a really bad gut feeling that something was off. I got chills immediately and tried to hide the feeling of terror I had at that moment from customers. I turned my head, and to my left I saw a girl staring at me. She looked completely normal at first, until she blinked. In what seemed like hours, I saw her blink in slow motion, her eyes going from the sides and meeting at the middle. After the first blink, I saw her eyes turn completely black. She cracked a small smile while staring at me straight through my mask and into my soul. I heard her laugh inside my head. I was frozen for a moment, and she blinked again and she looked normal. My body unfroze, and I tried my best to finish the wagon. This was literally the scariest thing that's ever happened to me in my life. What did I see? When I was a child, my family often spent the weekends or the holidays at my grandmother's house. As a typical traditional Malay house, the house was made out of wood and was quite huge. Not a surprise, since my father does have a lot of siblings, 9 of them. It wasn't just my immediate family. Most weekends or holidays, even my uncles and aunt would be there too, along with their family. Sometimes there would be around 50 to 70 of us inside that house. It was truly one of my fondest memories, where the entire huge family would sit together to have dinner or celebrate birthdays or whatever. One day, my grandmother fell sick. The doctor simply told us that her health was deteriorating since she was quite old at the time, but that she required no hospitalization. My dad and his siblings all made up their mind that my grandmother should stay with them. Every month, she would stay with a different one of her children at their house. I remember she stayed the most at my house, since it was the biggest at that time. I was happy, since she was a great storyteller and a great cook. In the meantime, my father and uncles hired a nearby neighbor to take care of and clean my grandmother's house every once in a while. Unfortunately, her health continued to decline. She told my father that she wanted to stay in her old home. At first, we didn't like the idea with her being alone in that house, especially with her declining health. After much discussion, my eldest uncle decided to build a house directly in front of my grandmother's house for him to stay in. In the meantime, they would rent a nearby house so that he or my cousins could visit her every day. My father and his siblings also agreed to hire a nanny for my grandmother so that she would never be alone. Fortunately, despite no one having been staying in the house for about 2 years, it was relatively clean. It had been almost a week since my grandmother returned to her own home. The weekend was coming, and my father decided to bring back the tradition of staying at my grandmother's. That Friday night, around 2 of us were there, and that night strange things began to happen. The first to notice that something was off were my cousins. They were all the daughters of Dad's youngest sibling. They were always cheerful, but at that time I remember their faces almost always looking terrified. I chalked it up to them just being kids, which was ironic since I was only around 10 myself at that time. Then, as I walked past their bedroom, I heard through the thin wall that the girls complained to their parents that they had noticed a few shadowy figures, which had been all over the house. My uncle tried to convince them that it was just their imagination. I decided not to care much. I was too tired and sleepy. That night, while I was sleeping, I remember waking up and staring above and seeing something terrifying. Just so you know, a traditional Malay house rarely has a ceiling. The house beam was exposed, and you can see the inside layer of the roof. During my sudden awakening, I saw something like a shadow sitting on the house beam. I had to rub my eyes to see, and after a while I began to make out what it was. It was some sort of creature or something. Am I still dreaming? I thought to myself. I was utterly terrified. I could see the creature, but it was like my brain failed to see exactly how it looked. Sometimes it would look like a lion, then a crocodile, then a huge bird or some other kind of animal. And then it looked at me. All I could remember was its huge red eyes and a wide grin filled with fangs. I tried to scream, but my voice stuck at my throat, and my body felt stiff as if I were paralyzed. All I could do was slowly pull up the blanket and hide my body underneath it, and force myself to go back to sleep, hoping that it was a nightmare. The next day, as I sat alone at the stairs, trying to get rid of the memories of what happened, from the corner of my eyes I could sense that someone or something had been peeking out from the toilet area looking at the living room. It appeared to be a child, or was the size of a child, with pale, gray skin. Another time I was sitting in a chair in the living room. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but it happened throughout the day and the night. That same child. Then I heard my aunts talking with each other. It turns out that I wasn't the only one who had noticed it. The entire family had seen it too. Or rather, we could only see it through the corner of our eyes. When we all turned to look at it directly, it disappeared. Some decided to check it out themselves, and yet nothing would ever be there. My uncle quietly told us that when a house was abandoned, there will always be something that will live there. That house had been abandoned for 2 years before, so obviously something had moved in, and we were all simply intruders. He told us that if we didn't bother them, they wouldn't bother us. That night we all prayed together, as well as recited some holy prayers. Yet I could still see the little stalker, and I could begin to notice a few shadows around the house that did not belong to the furniture or to the other people living there. Worse for me was at night. I woke up again, and this time the thing was already grinning at me with what I assumed a hand or finger poking at my cheek. It didn't feel solid at all. It felt more like a cloud of smoke. Again, I tried to scream, but my body felt stiff. Like before, I could only slowly pull my blanket to cover my head and force myself back to sleep. I never dare to sleep at that house ever again. Anytime we ever went back to my grandmother's house, during either weekends or holidays, I simply stayed at my uncle's house that was right in front of it. Yet every time I entered there, I could still sense the small figure poking its head out from the bathroom wall and the shadows that would be moving around. My grandmother passed away around 8 years ago, and since then we never have had reason to stay at that house. Now, the house was downsized while I was at university, yet it still has the original layout of the lower area. They only actually got rid of the upper area. I asked my father why not simply demolish the entire building. He then told me that even getting rid of the upper area was difficult. Workers were pushed by nothing, and electronics and engines would always malfunction. In the end, they decided not to touch the bottom area and just continue to use it as storage. A few months back, really closer to a year ago, a friend of mine suggested that we do something interesting with our night for once. He told me about how he had been to one of the city's cemeteries after dark a few times, and that it terrified him, but in that sort of way that makes it worthwhile. I was a little against it at first, because the cops like to check on the area often, and there was no way we were going to be walking into the graveyard sober. Of course, however, my mind changed when we got to talking. "You know about the witch?" He started cracking a grin. "I think so." I had heard very little. "Remind me, just in case." "So there's supposed to be this witch or ghost or some crap, and I know right where the grave is." "Jesus, alright." I don't know exactly what I believe, but I know that the place is messed up. He paused, thinking hard. I said, I honestly don't believe in anything, but a dark graveyard is scary anyway. Definitely need to check it out sometime if we don't get to it tonight. He popped up with, oh man, I just remembered there are these dead kids. What? There's a bunch of graves together for this one family, and a bunch of them are these kids. That spot is extra creepy. They're all old as hell, from like the 1800s or something. Well, I guess we gotta go see all of it. We pulled into the lot when the sun was setting and decided to smoke a little bit in the car since we had time anyway. As we smoked, the whole place emptied out, and we were the only ones in sight. By this point, we were at a comfortable level of dissociative perfection, so we brought just a little bit of it with us. And, of course, my pack of cigarettes, which is no longer a habit of mine, but at the time was a means for managing stress. So, off we went, with a bit of sun still shining and one single truck riding through the cemetery. We figured it would be good to wait for the truck to leave, assuming it was a worker watching for any unwanted guests. Although they had left the gates wide open, we were a little unsure of the legality of being around after dark, and a little bit uneasy about some psycho employee ratting on us and getting us caught with what we had. After about 10 minutes and 3 or 4 rounds of the truck passing by, we figured it would be smart to just go ahead and hide wherever we were if he passed by us again. We made our way down the main hill that leads into the center of the cemetery, and we noticed a chill that seemed to pass as we entered the real part. I passed it off as a weird current made by the creeks and the cooler air in that area, but a part of the primal fear that remained in the back of my mind made me question my devotion to reality. There were a few times where we had to hide behind a tree as the truck made its way back around, and then we would make a few more minutes of progress. As we began to become too close to sober, we imbibed a bit more. Another 30 minutes or so passed, and we had decimated almost our entire on-hand supply. We also had no clue where we were. As we wandered along the dark, winding roads, we started to get concerned about our phone batteries. His phone was worse off than mine, being near dead already, although mine was hardly doing better. After deciding to keep them in our pockets for the time being, the dark and discomforting silence started to make both of us paranoid. It was, of course, a bit heightened by our habits. We also noticed something else that was upsetting. We had started to go around in circles. As we realized this, I had the first real wave of fear for that night come rushing over me. I could swear that someone was inside one of the mausoleums with their face just barely out of view and moving around in the shadows. Dude, do you see that? On instinct, I grabbed for my inhaler. What? What the hell are you talking about? My friend said. In that, right there. I looked toward the window rather than pointing. I swear to Christ, I just saw someone in there. I saw the shadow of a face. My friend brushed me off. You're just freaked out because you smoked too much. It's nothing. Come on, we need to get to the witch, and then we can get the hell out of here. You still want to go see that? Well, yeah. If you don't want to, that's cool, but I'm gonna. I mean, alright, I'm cool with doing that, but I'm just getting a little out of it. About 3 cigarettes and another hour later, we heard something unnerving. At first, we assumed that it was a bunch of drunk teenagers, based on the volume and range of noises being made. Walking further, we found a sign for construction, and being high, we thought it made perfect sense that a group of construction workers must be around. You know, for some good nighttime, silent construction work. Then the voices began to get a bit too quiet for our comfort. We booked it, barreling in no real direction, and somehow ending up at the place. Here it is, my buddy exclaimed. This is it? I looked to a massive circle of tall, dry grass. Is it in the middle of this? No, man, he replied. It's way in the back. Come on, I'll show you. I put another cigarette to my mouth with a slight tremble in my hand and followed him through the pitch black and to a large stone structure in a patch of dirt. It was the family he had mentioned, and it made my stomach turn. The cold, rushing wave of fear came back, but it was too late to change my mind. We walked onto the large stone slab and then around it. As we walked around it, he pulled his phone back out to read the headstones. I was nervous with his light being on at this point, after being near those people that we had seen. After a minute, he turned to me. "You want to see the really messed up part?" "Messed up how?" I asked. "The forgotten children, their graves are back there down a skinny path." He motioned toward the trees. "You down?" "Well," I said, "I've got my smokes. Let's go." We looked at the graves, and my stomach turned, but I was unsure of why. I disliked the idea of dead kids, but my demeanor would never call for me to feel as sick as I did at that moment. Then my friend flipped his phone light back on to read off the names and dates. I started to really become anxious at that point, even voicing it. I scanned the woods, unable to see anything. My friend told me to just calm down, that the people we had seen had probably left by now. Then we heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the woods. At most, it was 50 feet away. It was an unusual scream, aggressive almost. It didn't sound as if someone were hurt, but more that they were threatening us. I was sure at the time that it was a woman, but the hopeful side of me likes to imagine that we just heard some animal. As we paced back down the path toward the stones at the base, I pulled a few cigarettes from my pocket and began to light them like crazy. This was pushed further by my friend stopping to read more stones as we saw no one following us. Within 10 minutes he had had his fill, and we continued back into the main area. After even more walking, we passed a group of cars parked in a grass patch. We assumed they must have belonged to the group of people from earlier, but we began to wonder why more than 1 or 2 people would be there for so long. Then we got lost for real. Deep in the back of the property, we found the witch's spot, but nothing of interest, so we decided to head back. By now his phone had died, so we used mine to get a map up. We had 30 minutes of walking to get through to get to the car. Halfway back, we started hearing voices again, loud and brash. However, as we got closer, they got less energetic. I peered ahead and froze, grabbing my friend and shushing him. I could see 3 large shadows right down the path from us. I also forgot my phone screen was on and heard something I'll never forget. "Wait," a deep voice murmured. "Do y'all see that?" "See what?" A second man joined in. "That, right there." The silhouette of his arm pointed directly to us. That light. I slapped my phone screen against my torso, panicking in an attempt to turn it off. Both of us held our breath, staying still as statues while that group kept discussing. "Go check it out then," chimed a woman's voice. "Or are you too scared?" "Why don't you stay here and check it out while we leave?" "Oh, screw off," she teased, in a way that helped me think they were decent people. We started to shimmy toward the patch of graves to our side, hoping they would forget about us and leave like they had said. But then we saw what kind of people they really were. The first man hushed both of the others, and nearly gave me a heart attack. "Let's get 'em." Both men darted toward us, but we were out of sight by then, low to the ground by the hill that we had run across, hiding. We heard them making their way around the area, and we somehow circled behind them, making it out. Then we heard cars starting. For about 20 minutes, these psychos circled through the paths, looking for us, and it cost us another half-hour overall. Exhausted, we made our way to the entrance, with an empty cigarette box, an empty bag, and a little bit of paranoia. We got back to his place and spent at least another hour talking about how insane that all of it had been, and then we had a thought. A ridiculous, but unnerving thought. What if we saw nothing at the witch's spot because she had been in the woods by the family? And then an even worse thought popped up. What if the scream wasn't aggressive like I thought, and those people had done something to someone right near us? Whatever really happened, I know one thing. I'm never going back there without a full group of friends and fully charged phones. When I was younger, I used to be obsessed with ghosts and all sort of haunting shows. Now, I'd never particularly had a reason to believe that my house was haunted, but one day my brother came home claiming to have found $10 out of nowhere. I'll never know for sure if he was just messing with me, but after curiosity got a hold, I asked him where he really got the money from. Stupid me assumed maybe a friend? Perhaps he stole it from my parents' wallet? My parents never claimed to have been missing any money, however, something they definitely would have voiced being distraught about had they noticed that we had taken their cash. The story he gave me was that a young girl, maybe about the age of 7, had followed him onto the school bus that afternoon. He had never met this girl before, and had never seen her around at school, but she decided to sit in the seat right in front of him. After riding the bus for a while, she started to talk to him. Nobody else could see her, according to him, and the other kids were giving him weird looks. Eventually, she handed him $10 with a note, and then subsequently got off the bus at the next stop. I immediately assumed that he was lying and laughed, of course. I asked him to show me the note, which he promptly retrieved from his room and passed me a tiny piece of paper. A shiver ran down my spine, as the note wasn't in his handwriting. It read, "I'll help you, but only this time," which I believe was in response to the fact that my brother was begging my parents for a Zelda charm bracelet for months, which they refused to buy him. Given that he had $10 now, he could just buy it himself, though. Of course, I was extremely intrigued by this, even if it sounded absurd. I suggested we make a makeshift Ouija board to see if we could contact anyone. So we wrote the alphabet on a piece of paper and grabbed a necklace to hover above the DIY board. My brother was interested too, so he decided it could be fun. Mind you, I was in 6th grade and he was in the 4th at the time, so any sort of movement from the necklace caught our attention and we immediately thought that it was a ghost. After asking a few questions, the necklace began to move and shake. Either my brother was really good at tricking me by slowly sliding the necklace across the board, or it really was something paranormal. We were able to get a name. Kate. After asking dumb things like, "Did you watch me complete the Shadow Temple in Ocarina of Time?" and getting a yes, me and my brother decided to stop for the night after starting to get creeped out. We never said goodbye before ending. Eventually, playing with the board would be a daily occurrence. We thought we'd made a friend, and truly believed that someone was talking to us. Me and my brother decided to take things a step further and try to record something. So we both got our tablets, placed them in front of our TV, and hit record. The first thing I asked was, if someone was here, move something in the room. There was nothing. Okay, well, maybe the ghost is shy? We decided to repeat the same question, but this time we said that we would leave the room and give it a minute. We went downstairs for 5 minutes, and when we got back up, our tablets had both fallen to the floor and stopped recording. Coincidence? I mean, things fall, especially when you're not careful at placing them. So we brushed it off. In December of 6th grade, though, things got really weird. I had started hearing voices in my head, claiming that they were the ghost I was talking to while playing the Ouija board. I got so scared one night that I had grabbed the Bible that one of my religious friends had gifted me, and would sleep with it. Eventually, I told my mom that there was a ghost telling me scary things. I won't get into detail, as some of it was a little graphic. She and my dad argued for a while about whether or not I was schizophrenic, and if I should see a therapist. So, out of fear, I never told them that I was hearing voices again, but I would space out often, talking and having conversations with this thing that I believed to be a ghost. Eventually, I forgot about the ghost, and we no longer talked. I will never know what that voice was, if I was genuinely insane, or if they were just intrusive thoughts. I was just glad for it finally to have stopped. Nothing necessarily paranormal has happened to me since, besides my TV turning on randomly in the middle of the night or feeling that someone was pushing my legs with some sort of unknown force every once in a while. I sum it up to just be my imagination playing tricks on me now, but I do still have this looming feeling that ever since I've played with that Ouija board, I have some sort of spirit attached to me, following me. Not a bad one, but just a constant presence. Honestly, I don't think I've ever experienced paranormal activity in terms of seeing something. But ever since I was a kid in my childhood home, I was really scared, almost traumatized of seeing something or hearing something in the dark at night. No specific reason for it. I would just stare at the doorframe of my room, which was always opened at night, and wait for something to show. I never even liked horror movies, and even now at 21 I avoid them because I know they freak me out, so I don't believe that the fear came from the movies. The thing is, I moved to a different city when I was 18 years old and changed a few apartments until now, and in every single one of them, I felt chills. Everything is fine, and then comes a certain time of night when it's like the energy in the room changes, and I have a feeling that someone is watching me. I always believed that if I could convince myself not to believe in spirits or that the paranormal is real, then I can escape from that, and nothing weird will happen to me if I don't believe or give it attention. Am I right? But here we are. I started to think, what if the cold, watching feeling and fear I get every night is related to some childhood trauma that I might not remember? Fast forward to today. My boyfriend and I moved back to his parents' house after the lockdown. We have a separate upper apartment for ourselves, and no one but him ever lived there. We have spent so many months and nights here before, and really the apartment never gave me any chills. Until the last month or so. So lately I have this really bad vibe in this place, especially at night. It can be dark outside around 6 p.m. or 10 p.m. and everything is super. Then there just comes this time, after midnight, when the air in the room changes and I feel like something negative has entered. The whole energy is negative, and the feeling of someone looking at me returns. Most of the time I'm scared to have my eyes opened, that I might see something. He doesn't feel the same thing and says it's because of the stress and anxiety. And true, it might just be paranoia, and I'm going crazy. But I had several nights when I really did feel like something was messing with me. I would wake up with the sensation like someone had pushed me, and my boyfriend was dead asleep. I would have sleep paralysis and again would have a feeling like someone is poking me and hear banging noises that weren't there. I was sleepless for a few nights, and then I started taking Xanax just to make me fall into deep sleep to get some rest. When I am able to sleep, there's that time before falling into sleep when I feel the most vulnerable because of the dark and the dead silence. There are radiator noises and downstairs noises, which, by the way, are loud footsteps even in the middle of the night. And sometimes I would ask them if they were awake at the time, and they said they were sleeping. But still, I kind of comfort myself with the idea of it just being normal house noises. The worst thing is going to the bathroom at night. I have bladder issues, so it's normal for me to go at 1, 2 a.m. Don't know why, but I noticed this pattern. And often, I'm just terrified. I use my phone as a flashlight and practically run there. If I can hold it, I do, because that's how scared I am of the negative energy in the air. I'm so afraid of seeing a shadow or a face staring at me. It's like I know that something is present, but I'm unable to give it shape or form. Sometimes it's like I can sense someone's breath on my face. Never thought I would write something like this because it is the opposite of ignoring the problem and convincing myself that I am imagining. But I'm not sure what to do anymore. Every night I lay in my bed. And in just moments, the air in the room switches to negative, cold, and spooky. I can't live like this. It's stressing me out so much, and I just want to know if it makes any sense. Am I crazy and too paranoid so that I just imagine all of this? Or could it really be that something is there? This incident happened to me when I was 14, and I've told the story and gone over it in my mind so many times exactly as it happened that it feels as if it were just yesterday. My uncle, 2 younger cousins, aunt, and I had gone up to the Rocky Mountains to have some fresh air and watch the stars. We went up a lot back then, when you were still allowed to at night. Now that park closes at 10, sadly, and our adventures such as this one ended about 3 months after this incident. Those 2 things are somehow inextricably linked in my mind. I can't help but wonder. We all 5 piled out of my uncle's AMC hatchback, a tight fit, and stood around the car on the side of the dark road talking about life and joking about Mothman. Betty, my aunt, was the first to hear a noise in the woods across the road to our left, but we dismissed it as an animal, and the adults and I, being older and in on the joke, tried to scare the kids. But a loud crash came from the woods, when no one had thrown anything, nobody had gone over there, and I'd had my eyes on the whole group the entire time, which meant that none of us were laughing now. My uncle chuckled nervously. Let's get in the car. We got in silently. Something had changed. The wood was quiet except for the sound of the car itself toiling down the mountain, as something followed our car, moving the trees about 10 yards behind us on the driver's side where the mountains slanted down. Nothing but trees over here, I thought. What the hell could that thing be? Feeling the tension in the car, I took matters into my own hands and leaned out the back driver's side window intrepidly. It was still behind us, crashing through the trees and moving through the treetops, right after our car. My mind grew curious. Go faster, I urged my cousin Brian. He sped down the winding road, but the thing in the forest followed. I looked at the speedometer. 35. We could do this. Go faster, I said. It was keeping pace, but always just behind the car. I was livid that I could not catch a glimpse of whatever was big enough to make such a racket and bend the trees to its whim. I finally yelled at him to go faster, but again the thing kept up. Our tiny car was racing down the winding mountain road, sheer rock on one side of us, certain death on the other, our headlights the only things lighting the way down as we sped out the gate of the park, turned, and peeled down the paved road toward town. The kids were in tears. Brian nearly was too. Betty was silent, something which, if you knew her, you'd know the gravity of the situation when she actually chooses to shut up. Brian was yelling back at me and asking me what that thing was as I crawled back into my seat and buckled up. No, I said dejectedly. I couldn't see a thing. Months later, I tried to talk to my family about the occurrence, and found that none of them even remembered it except Betty. They had blocked it out of their memories, I guess from sheer shock, the poor souls. Even to this day, my uncle and younger cousins don't even want to talk about it. Looking back now and having watched a lot of Bigfoot investigations since, it's a likely possibility that what I didn't see was a Sasquatch. However, there were things even weirder than that in this local area. When I was 3 years old and living with my mom at the time, we bounced around a lot from house to house. We ended up moving into a house that was just a few blocks away from my dad. I just want to state that these are my very first memories. I don't remember anything before this house. That's how traumatic that it was for me. But I'll do my best to explain these experiences in an adult version because I was 3 at the time and still hadn't learned to talk very well. So we move in, and I don't remember anything out of the ordinary happening right away, but soon I would start seeing this red man or bad man or fireman. My mom told me that's always what I would call him, because I have very little memory of what I would call this thing. I vividly remember it wanting to hurt me. I don't know how I knew, but I knew that I wasn't safe every time I saw him. Sometimes he would chase me down the halls or come through the walls, and I would run to my mom trying to explain what was happening. My mom said that I would run up to her crying and shaking, saying that the bad man was trying to hurt me. This thing kept going on, and eventually something else started happening. Every time this red man would try and hurt me, this new entity would show up. I say entity because I couldn't tell its gender, and I don't remember it having a face, but it was like it was a glowing ball of light that would chase away the bad man every time he was around. This went on for months before I finally moved in with my dad. Because I was so scared constantly, I actually developed a stutter and my whole body would tremble. One day while living at my dad's, I was drawing and my mom asked if I could draw what I was seeing. I was drawing in a coloring book, and one page had an angel on it, and I started drawing circles around it because I couldn't actually see what it was. In my mind, it was just a big ball of white energy. I'm not Christian and don't believe in angels or demons, but I do believe in negative energies and positive ones that could maybe manifest into ghosts or spirits. So at this point, I had permanently moved in with my dad. I went to speech therapy for a long time to fix the stutter, and now, even to this day, my hands shake. Apparently, it's called trauma tremors. After moving in with my dad, my mom and brother, who had never seen anything weird like I did, just saw my reactions to it. Both started experiencing things. Not as bad as what had happened to me, but still creepy as hell. My mom would start to hear the piano play, and my uncle played the piano, so she thought that it was him playing it, until she walked over there and realized that no one was in the room. My brother would see shadows and lights turn off by themselves, but that's all that really happened to them. My mom eventually moved out of that house because too many things were going on and she really was getting creeped out. Me and her moved into a trailer, and the first night there, I was laying in bed with her, and I was apparently staring into the bathroom. I don't remember this, but my mom does. And she asked what I was staring at, and I said, "There's a man standing in the bathtub." And she then asked, "Is he a good man or a bad man?" I said, "A good man," and went to sleep right after. We later found out that the owner of the trailer before us was an old man who had died. Ever since then, I've never seen any paranormal things, but I can still sense if houses have good or negative energies. Believe this story or not, but it was very real to me and has permanently given me a tremor. When I was older, probably around 7, and could fluently speak, my family asked me if I remembered what had happened at the house. I guess they thought that I forgot or had made it up, and I told them the story in astounding detail, and it freaked everyone. Me and my mom occasionally talk about this from time to time because we still don't know what had happened. We just know it did, and that it was messed up. My first visit to this hospital was in 2018. After searching for the address for a while, I came across one that looked accurate enough and went on my way to that lost place with a friend of mine. We arrived, astonished by the size of the complex. I didn't do a lot of research before that. I just knew that it used to be a hospital and was built during World War II, and by the address, it seemed legit. On our way down from the parking lot to the lost place, our excitement was growing. But so was our anxiety for reasons that we just couldn't ascertain. We make our way onto the complex at the part where the main entrance was before, and the air felt really dense. My friend felt the same way, but we brushed it off as just being a bit nervous, just ourselves, and we started to walk past some buildings at the entrance, completely focused and being amazed. At some point, my pulse must have slowed down due to me being focused on trying to take in everything I was seeing, because I noticed that it increased in speed when we reached the buildings where I suspected that the patients would have been. It felt like there was strong electricity in the air that made me feel even more uneasy. That's when we heard a door slam behind us at one of the buildings. We, of course, completely froze. The sound came from a building that was pretty far away from us, and that sound was very loud. There was no wind at all that could have caused the heavy doors to slam like that. The trees weren't moving, nor did we hear anything else. Just one door that decided to slam shut on its own. We nervously chuckled and decided to move closer to the exit. I asked my friend if I should record this visit on my phone, and she agreed. We both turned on airplane mode and went on our way. Whether it was due to our anxiety, or us being too alert, or something actually being there, we would turn around or stop walking at the same time, asking the other if we had heard that sound. Sometimes the sounds behind us resembled soft footsteps. Other times, we would hear silent whispers that we couldn't quite make out. At some point, I began to question my sanity, but I knew that there had to be something there to make such specific noises, loud enough that my friend would also hear them, as I did. As we were walking toward the actual exit, we stopped to look at one building and we heard a very, very loud bang behind us, making our walking become very determined as we made our way to the main street. The bang was accompanied by other sounds that we couldn't define back then. Fast forward and both of us are at my place. We grab individual headphones and start to listen to the recording. And boy, was that some weird stuff. We both enabled plane mode before I hit the record button, but there were so many disturbances in the recording, distinct sounds like someone coughing, whispers, with clear vowels, that we couldn't quite make out the full words to. A woman's voice going, shh, breathing, and bleeps. I have to admit that we were freaking out a lot. I was almost crying because I found it to be so chilling. The thing that baffled us the most was the loud bang that made us leave. I swear to you, it wasn't there. At all. Not the bang on the recording that startled us so much that made us leave the place, but silent sounds? You can hear us being startled and agreeing to leave immediately, but no bang could be heard on that recording, and it's still not there. I held my phone the exact same way that I had been since I started that recording. I didn't put my clothes against one mic. The mics weren't broken after a test recording that we did. So there should be a banging sound, but absolutely there is not. And I have no clue why that is the case. That hospital is a really special place. From later experiences there, I have come to possible conclusions as to what kind of paranormal things occur. I live in South Africa with my family, and we recently moved into a 2-story house. My room is upstairs. Simple room, really, bed facing the sliding door. Just outside the sliding door, I have a small area where I can smoke. To my left, we have a view of our indoor pool, with an almost UV light type of effect. Now, to my problem. It's been 2 weeks in this new place, and something is following me. I know I sound crazy, but it breathes very, very hard. Last night I went to bed at around 11 p.m. after watching some memes on YouTube. I woke up with a rather foul smell. I honestly assumed I had farted in my sleep, but as soon as I stood up to open the sliding door, I felt it. I swear I am not crazy. I felt something breathing down my neck, and the smell got worse. Me and my friends went into the forest that's in my backyard. We went at least 5 minutes deep into the woods, down to a stream. We looked across the stream and saw a log, or at least what we thought was a log. It might have been, but one of us pointed out that it seemed to have turned its head. We ran as fast as we could back out of there. This was during a sleepover. We went to sleep around 3, but I ended up waking up around 4 after hearing a noise. I saw a shadowy figure that immediately disappeared once I laid eyes on it. I haven't seen anything else since. It could have just been my imagination, but I could have sworn that I did in fact see it. And it had the same outline as what we saw from a distance earlier that afternoon. My friends and I told me that I was just being paranoid, but I don't think I was. So I checked it out again in the same place, and the log figure was gone. So I still feel as if that thing were not after me, but after one of my friends. 2 years later, and still, I haven't heard or seen anything of it. Although every now and then, I do get the feeling that I'm being watched. I've been getting a little less sleep, but I think that might just be the fact that my sleep schedule is trying to adjust, but I still don't know what that thing is, and whether or not it was real, or if it was just part of my mind playing tricks on me. But again, I don't think that that was it. Remember when I said I hadn't seen anything of it since? Well, I lied. The other day I went back into the forest, and there it was, in the same position that me and my friends had seen it in 2 years ago. I brought them over there, and they confirmed that they were seeing the same thing. It did not look over this time, but I've had an uneasy feeling ever since. They started to stop with the feeling 1 year afterward, but when I saw it a few days ago, the uneasy feeling increased. I don't know what it is, or what it wants, but I don't like it. It's not anything I've seen in any paranormal YouTube videos or anything else about the paranormal, which leads me back to believing that it wasn't real. But my friends confirmed that it was real, and I'm not questioning what they said. So it was real, and it was scary. I hope the uneasy feeling goes down soon, and if the thing ever comes near my house again, I am going to call the police. Oh, and I forgot to mention that the morning after the sleepover, I saw not footprints, but something else that I can't quite put my finger on. Something that no human foot could ever have made. I have no idea what it was, and don't plan on trying to figure it out. Back in the early 80s, my then boyfriend moved into an apartment in Brockport, New York to be closer to his college. It was a nice 2-bedroom. The building was about 5 years old. It overlooked the parking lot of some plazas, with a burger monarch that he worked part-time at. Every night, from the time we moved in until I moved out, I had one of 3 creepy dreams. One involved being back at my parents' house, where the stairs up to the attic are in my closet, and either an infestation of snakes or something oozy and rotting was sort of slurping its way to the stairs to make its way down. The second dream was of being lost and unable to find the apartment building. The big kicker dream involved it being moving day, and as I walked around trying to decide where to hang the spice shelf, I noticed black and red writing and smears on the walls. I remember thinking to myself in the dream that they should have been painted over. The night before I moved out, the dream continued with me being in my bedroom, and there was a guy in a hooded robe standing and leaning against the doorframe watching me. I woke up when Keith got home from his work shift, and he asked me why I didn't wave back. See, he had one of those great hooded velour bathrobes, and he had waved at a hooded figure in our bedroom window thinking that I had gotten up to watch for him coming home. I wasn't standing there, and wasn't even awake. When we were moving out, him back to the dorm and me to a different branch of my company, we found a little medallion with some of the glyphs that I had seen on the wall in my dreams. Luckily, who or whatever it was didn't follow me, and a friend warded the heck out of my new bedroom. I've been working at a funeral home for about a year as an assistant, and will be starting up my apprenticeship next month. I have had several weird encounters since working there, but nothing to write about until tonight. I got back from picking up a decedent around 8:30 p.m. I wheeled him into the prep room, and as I turned around to close the door behind me, I heard a man's voice. The voice either said, "I'm here," or "Come here." I wasn't too freaked out. Weird stuff happens a lot. However, this is the first time that I have actually heard disembodied words. This isn't the most exciting story, but I definitely thought that it was worth sharing. I was a senior in high school, and I always hung out with my sister, who was 5 years older than me, and her friends. That night it was us siblings, her best friend H, who was the same age as my sister, and our friend G, who was about 20 and enlisted in the army. We thought it would be a great idea, since it was close to Halloween, to play with a Ouija board for the first time. We got a Ouija board and decided to turn off all the lights in the house and light a few candles to really set the mood. So we sat on the floor of the living room and started our little game. I was sitting between H and G, across from my sister. It took a while, but we finally got a response when G asked if anyone was there. The planchette slid to yes. We kinda giggled because we thought it was one of us. But then it started spelling out Mama. My sister and I immediately go pale and make eye contact across the board. Our grandmother had passed away next door, about a year prior to this. Before we could ask another question, the planchette spelled out the word love. We still weren't convinced. A little spooked, but not scared. G then asked the board, "How many children do you have?" And the planchette slid to the number 2, which is the correct number of kids that our grandmother had. It's important to know that G and H didn't know very much about our grandmother. They came into our lives after our grandmother had passed, so they never met her. The planchette then spelled out the words, "Roll Tide." Now we live in Alabama, and my grandmother was the biggest Alabama football fan. She would watch every game. The Alabama football catchphrase is, "Roll Tide." My sister and I immediately begin crying because it just seems so unreal, and then the planchette starts moving again. This time it's sliding around and going to the word, "Goodbye." I ask, "Do you want us to stop playing?" And the planchette quickly slides to yes. My sister doesn't want to stop. She asks, "But why? We want to ask you more questions." And the planchette quickly moves across the board to spell out the word bad. That was more than enough for me. I felt like if this was my mama, and she was telling us to stop playing, maybe we should take her advice and quit while we were ahead. She said bad. Did that mean that something bad would happen? Or that doing that was bad, with the Ouija board? I don't want to find out. But after trying to convince my sister and friends, it did no good. The planchette keeps circling the board and going back to goodbye over and over again. Finally, everyone says goodbye because it's clear that nothing else was going to be discussed. But then, for some reason, I was talked into participating again. This time, when something answered us back, the planchette moved across the board even faster, but it was between 2 letters only. Z-O-Z-O-Z-O. And that's all it would say. I don't know what the others felt, because we really didn't talk about it much, but to me, it felt like the room became colder. It was then unanimous that we did decide to say goodbye. We were shaking. Whatever we had just spoken to didn't feel right. My sister and I decided to sleep in the same bed. I remember lying in bed and being huddled together and just looking around the room. Every sound made me jump. I swear, I could see dark humanoid figures all around. Maybe it was paranoia, but I definitely did not sleep at all that night. I kept thinking about how Mama or whatever was imitating her had said bad, like it was a warning. My sister ended up getting rid of the board shortly after. I'm not sure what she did with it. I know her and some other friends tried to play with it again in a very old graveyard near our house with graves that dated back to the 1800s. While they were playing, they heard what sounded like footsteps in the woods around the graveyard, and what sounded like scraping on one of the headstones. I don't plan on touching another Ouija board again. If you lived in Canada, then you know that there's a lot of countryside out here along with forests. Most of the abandoned buildings you might come across are found there. I was 16 when this happened. I grew up mostly in the rougher part of the capital. Yes, even Ottawa has its tough spots, and one is known as Vanier. While it's no Detroit, it's still where most of the poor, along with other drug addicts and homeless, live and stay. I've been through plenty of stuff that a lot of people would say is scary, but this is something that still to this day, at 21 years of age, does not sit well with me. I was with my buddies at a warehouse of sorts. It was pretty deep in the forest. We were drinking and talking when one of my friends brought up the old story of a haunted farm near that spot. He went on about how the guy who got him in brought him there to scare the crap out of him. I want to add that when they went, he did confirm that his friend was the one who was messing with him, but he still said that something was off about it, so we started making jokes. And then I made a joke that got him really serious. I think I said something along the lines of, "There's a ghost in there with Betty White making a porno." He then looks me in the eyes and tells me, "No, something is messed up in there. I don't care what, but I felt it." Me being the jerk that I am, I joked about how he was being a wuss and that the only things you really have to fear is fear itself. He then convinced me to go to this haunted barn. In retrospect, I should have just shut up right there and then. Next thing I know, we're heading to the barn. We get there, and it's me, my friend, plus this guy that I don't really know, but he was with the group. We walk in, the three of us. Me and the other guy start loudmouthing, right? Wild stuff like, "Hey Casper, what's poppin'?" and "First spirit that comes out gets bopped on sight." I'm not joking when I say that we get halfway in when these heavy doors shut on us. Those big barn doors, the old ones that took some effort getting them open in the first place, let alone having them swing closed like that. We go to push them open only to find out that they were stuck. So we immediately turn to my friend and start grilling him over trying to trip us up over some fake ghost crap, while Random that was with me starts turning on his flashlight on his phone. I'm asking where our mutual friend is, who I thought was helping him, until I noticed my friend is straight tearing up, which causes me to start freaking out. And I mean freaking out. I'm banging on the door, trying to get homeboy to help, while big homie is acting like a statue. I get a weird feeling on my shoulder. I start to freeze up, and all I hear to my side is "scared," as if it were some kind of taunt. I spin around, seeing the same scene as from when I had started freaking. The guy pushing on the door, my friend staring off into nothing. As I'm asking if anyone heard that, the guy pushing the door starts spazzing, saying something in Spanish, I think. I grab him, telling him to calm down, while he's giving me this look like he just got shot. I'm sitting there trying to snap him out of his funk. Then my friend starts ramming into the door over and over really hard. I thought he was going to hurt himself. It was dark. I can't tell exactly what was being thrown around, but I can tell you that a lot was going through the air. We just started hearing crashes from all sides. I even got hit with something. I still have a scar to this day on the left side of my chin and my left shoulder. Then, the screaming. It was like 3 chicks were getting cut up. It was awful. I won't lie, I'm not going to act tougher than I am. I started passing out for the first time, being the most bizarre feeling. My friend grabs me and the random guy, both of us not seeing that he did get the door open. When we got out, I threw up, while the random dude said something that I didn't catch and then just took off. My friend and I looked at each other and started walking back. The entire way he was explaining that he had no part in this. He kept swearing it up and down. I kept ranting about how that this was impossible, and that there was no lock on the door, so how was it even locked? And that caused him to freak out more. I had to go to the doctor to get stitches for whatever it was that flew into me while we were in there. When I told the doctors what happened, which I had to say what happened, but really I should have just made something up, because it could have been anything. And when I told them what did happen, they looked at me as if I were crazy upon my explanation. They actually made me go and see a shrink for a bit, due to my outlandish claims. After a while, they let me off the hook, thinking that I wasn't crazy. All I know is that I was sober that night. Last time I checked, 2 beers don't make you trip out. And random dude is refusing to tell us why he was screaming. Now, for a bit of comparison, when I was 15, I had a shotgun pointed at me and then pressed into my stomach, being threatened that they would pull the trigger. But that's simple. I'm about to get blown up, and that's gun plus angry dude equals body. But that night, I could not explain, nor could I control, or fight back. That night fills me with a terror that has changed my life. And I see how rooms and dark places that I didn't know what was happening or how to react to or defend are the reasons to this day that this was one of the most horrifying experiences I have ever had. Don't get me wrong, getting a gun pointed at me got me on the path where I'm trying to change my life. But I can't change not being able to walk in the dark around my house and my refusal to be in dark rooms. I had a weird series of encounters as a child in my hometown that I have since moved back to, and I just chalked it up to sleep deprivation mixed with having a vivid imagination. This first one happened when I was really little. I'd say in 2004 maybe, 2003? I suck with dates. This was one of the first experiences that I had, and it's pretty fuzzy. All I really recall is being at the top of a flight of stairs and jumping down the whole thing, almost as if I could float down. I looked back on this one and I thought that maybe I had fallen down the stairs and just didn't remember. But in that case, I would have gotten a ton of scrapes and bruises because it was a big wooden staircase. Likely not related to the other experiences I had, but still, weird. There was some weird stuff in between these two, but I'd rather just get to the meat of it. Anyways, here's the biggest one that really bothers me. When I was in middle school, I was incredibly rebellious, and decided to try running away from home in the fall of 2014. I got up in the middle of the night, and just decided to walk straight down the road. Not sure what my plan was there. Anyways, I ended up following the highway until I ended up around Thunderbolt, east of where I lived, and was stupidly proud of myself for not chickening out, and that I'd stopped crying. Anywho, I wandered some more, hopped some fences amid my adrenaline high, and ended up in these dense, really trashy woods. I started thinking over things, and crying again. Then I heard what sounded like my mom calling out my name from up on the highway, and instinctively ran away from it. I remember looking up to the highway and just seeing a person go limp and fall off the side and under the overpass in my direction, then start running toward me on all fours like some kind of creature. It was super dark, and I couldn't make out any features at all, and I wasn't interested in getting closer. So I just ran like the damn wind until my legs were shaking and I sat down in the underbrush. I was resting for a bit and still shaking, and crying and all that. Then I heard my mom calling my name again. It sounded like it was the exact same volume, like it was from the same distance away. It almost sounded like a mosquito buzzing super quietly in my ear. I passed out for the night, and then found my way back home in the morning. I thankfully ended up getting home safely, and all I got was bars on my window, scolding from my mom, and a sandal to the head. Oh, and sleep paralysis just about every night of my life since. You have no reason to believe me, and you probably won't. I don't care. I just need to speak my truth, as it weighs on me sometimes. Since it happened in July, I told myself that I would take it to my grave out of fear. Fear of my significant other, family, and friends thinking that I'm crazy and ostracizing me. I have no history of mental illness, and I don't take meds, but I also just don't want to scare them. In July, around 10 to 12 a.m., I went to the kitchen with a blanket over me to grab a fork and a drink. I was carrying the drink in my right hand and the fork in my left as I struggled to keep the blanket wrapped around me. As I was heading back to the living room, I realized that the downstairs light and the ceiling light were on. I turned off the downstairs light with my left hand and looked to confirm that it was off. The ceiling lights were closer, so I continued on to turn the ceiling lights off behind me while looking down the stairs. The ceiling light flickered and burnt out, and I froze. A blue light appeared at the bottom of the stairs, and I cried, but it wasn't out of fear. I was already in a good mood, and it felt comforting. I stared, and tears continued to pour down my cheeks. In awe, I walked left past the corner and stood there and continued to cry. For 3 minutes I stood there like that, questioning what I had seen. It appeared instantly after the lights burnt out. Could it have always been there? Who knows? I doubted my sanity, and by the time I went back to look down the stairs, it was gone. As much as I try to forget, the emotional attachment to what happened always helps me remember. I had to make a decision that night. Carry on with my life, or keep asking questions that I didn't have the answers to and let it consume me and destroy me. I accepted that I may never know what it was, just that it is my truth, and I don't want to be afraid to share it. This is my story from about 4 years ago. I was on a camping trip with some friends when we decided to go a little bit further into the forest to get the best location at the river. We had some beers and went swimming. When it started to get dark, almost all of my friends wanted to go home. Only my buddies Flo and Laura stayed with me. We lit a fire and continued to drink beer. After some hours, I felt like I had to go to the toilet. No problem, even had toilet paper in my backpack. Our camp was located right at the river, and a big field of high grass separated us from the forest. I decided to go to the high grass right in front of the trees, so I grabbed my phone as a flashlight and grabbed the toilet paper and went in the direction of the forest. It was pitch black, and because of the branches of the trees, I couldn't even see into the forest with my flashlight. So I sat down with my back to the forest and started doing my business. I was about 160 feet away from my friends now and couldn't even hear them talking anymore. When I was almost finished, I heard a sound coming from behind me. It was like the rustle of dry leaves or the crackle of branches. I know it's the kind of horror movie stereotype. I stumbled and said, "Hello? Who's there?" 2 or 3 times. But no one answered. I thought it might be some kind of animal, so I screamed as loud as I could. But to my horror, this thing got even closer. I finished as fast as I could, which still felt like an hour to me, while the sound came closer and closer with each passing second. When I stood up and started running, the thing was so close that I expected it to grab me from behind as I tried to escape. So I ran as fast as I could, screaming and crying. When I arrived at our camp, I told my friends everything. They didn't really believe me, but they were pretty scared themselves. I was 17 at the time, big and muscular, and normally not the type of guy to cry. But this thing made me cry, and it would make me again. I could not sleep at all that night. I sat in my sleeping bag, the river to my back, while staring into the direction of the forest. There were no sounds or anything, just the sound of the wind and darkness. In the morning, we packed our stuff and made our way home. I won't go anywhere near that forest anymore. Jokes were often made about me, but I know what I heard, and I get the shivers right now just while writing this. In Germany, we have no dangerous animals living in the forests, but every animal in our forest would avoid contact with humans, especially when you shout at them. Since childhood, I've had my fair share of paranormal experiences, especially while sleeping. I've had one particular entity visit me in my dream for 1 year when I was in a different house. Never seen that entity again once I moved, even though I lived in the same area. Just a lot of weird stuff like this. But last night, I had the weirdest experience of my life. I was sleeping in bed with my wife, and I dreamt that my wife kissed me and went under the blanket. I woke up and sat on the bed with my lower body covered with a blanket. I checked on my wife, but she wasn't in the bed. That was so strange. So if my wife was not in the bed, then who kissed me? While I'm thinking about this, realizing that my wife was outside in the living room, something started moving under the covers. It was like a snake or a tentacle that started wrapping around my legs. I kid you not, I was freaked out, and at the same time I was very calm because everything was smooth and non-aggressive. It felt like something were cuddling my legs. I slapped myself to make sure that I was awake, and I was, white as day. Holy smokes, I thought, this thing is moving and cuddling in the sheets, and it was bloody real. As the thing moved from my thighs to my shins, I literally saw the blankets move with it. Then I freaked out a little more, but not enough to stop it. I couldn't help myself, I was still curious. I kept sitting on my bed while the thing moved to my shin. I felt it wrap around both my legs and just stay in that position, like a ghost hug. I moved my foot up and down, just to check to see if this was anything like sleep paralysis, but it wasn't. My foot was fine. Everything was moving. I was moving. That thing was moving, and I was wide awake. But now it was getting really freaky, and I had to get out of it. I slowly pulled the blanket off, and whatever that was, I couldn't see. It slowly unwrapped and went away. I got up and went to my wife, told her the story, and we came back to bed. We woke up the next morning, and here I am, still freaked out, hoping that it was an act of love by whatever, and nothing more. I remember around 12 years ago, when I was around 11 or 12, I stayed over at my grandmother's a lot to keep her company after my grandfather passed away. I was lying in bed one night. I had just turned the TV off to go to sleep when I heard a creaking sound outside the door, but I just thought it was Grandma going to the bathroom since she had to walk past my room to get there. Then, I heard the handle being pulled down, and again I just thought it was my grandma, maybe just coming in to say goodnight before bed. As I looked toward the door, I saw a large, white hand grip the edge of the door, and instantly I knew it wasn't her. I was too terrified to say or do anything, so I just kept watching as the door slowly opened. Because of the window at the top of the stairs outside the room, there was just enough light from the streetlights outside coming through to see what it was. It was a tall, slightly transparent figure. It just stood in the doorway for what could have been seconds or minutes, or who really knows how long. I couldn't look away, and I refused to shut my eyes, even to blink, but of course, I had to eventually, and once I blinked, the figure was gone. with only the open door as proof that it wasn't my imagination. To this day, I still don't know what it was. I told my friends before, and they said it could have been my grandfather's ghost, but it was way too tall and skeletal looking to be my grandfather in my opinion, and I felt a deep, sinister feeling from it that couldn't be further from the warm, loving person that my grandfather had been. I've had a few odd experiences with things before that I could chalk up to imagination or overreacting, but as they say, you have to see it to believe it. And after that day, I certainly believe. Ever since, it's had me wondering what else could be out there. So I found this old, abandoned, broken-down house in the woods close to where I live. I've only lived here about a year. I was alone walking around it, trying to see if I could have a peek inside. While I was walking around and whatnot, I felt a bit scared, but I pressed on. I found a way in, but it smelled so much of mold that I just decided not to bother. Anyway, the point of the story. When I was about to leave, I felt this sensation of sadness wash over me. I stopped and turned around, and looked at an open window of the house from about 10 meters away, and I swear that there was a woman who stood there being in pain from the state of her house. I stared, and was almost about to cry for a few moments as I walked away, but then I stopped and looked back again. I almost felt drawn to the house, not wanting to leave, but as soon as I got away from it and was walking back home through the forest, the feeling of sadness left. On a side note, the day before I had walked through a part of the forest where a lot of trees had been cut down and a lot of branches and bark were scattered all over the ground. There I also felt such sadness, as if the trees themselves were crying. As I'm writing this, I realize that I sound kind of insane, but I have never really felt this way before, and I feel normal like one day later, like today. I first discovered the Ouija board when I was 14. A girl was visiting from America, I'm in the UK, and she told us how to talk to ghosts. 8 of us went to her house and made a board with ripped bits of paper and a turned wine glass. 4 of us would put our fingers on the glass, and we would swap someone out every so often. This way we believed that it would eliminate anyone who might be pushing the glass. I'll add here that the finger that had been in the glass always felt cold afterward. Don't know if others have noticed this. The first few days were spent asking silly questions like, does so-and-so fancy me, or who will I marry, etc. On the 3rd day, things took a darker turn, and we started getting responses told to us without asking. It started saying things like, so-and-so will get run over, and X will die of cancer, and other really freaky shit. This scared us, and we stopped playing. Years later, in my early 20s, I shared a flat with my brother and boyfriend at the time, and bored one night we decided to do a Ouija board. So we made a board, as I had when I was younger, and set to it. It didn't take long for the glass to move, and we asked who it was, where they came from, and how they had died. It told us its name was Bill. He was an old hippie, and he had died from an overdose. Anyhow, things went on for a while, then my boyfriend, who was convinced that we were the ones pushing the glass, said if there's really a ghost here, prove it. I kid you not a second later, the lights went out. At that time, I had one of those old-fashioned meters that you had to put money in, so after my initial shock, I reasoned that I needed to put a coin in the meter, and stood up to do it. But before I got to the door, the lights came back on. Somewhat spooked, I sat back down and me and my brother put our fingers back on the glass. My boyfriend point-blank refused. The glass then spelled out, "Chilly trick, hey." After that, it kept going in circles and moving toward me, so I decided that enough was enough and said goodbye. A few years ago, after Facebook started and I got back in touch with my old school friends, I heard that one of them had died of cancer in his late teens. Not sure about the other prophecy, but I know that I'll never do a Ouija board again, and I firmly believe that we do tap into forces beyond our five senses. This happened last night. I am currently car camping. I woke up last night for a whiz, and while I was doing my thing, I could see a floating, irregularly shaped light off to my left, about 2 meters, 6 feet, away. I didn't feel scared, more of a what is that kind of feeling. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this, so please bear with me. Its appearance was kind of like a parallelogram, except the short edges were jagged and ripped into 2 long appendages. It was kind of a milky white in color, with no light emanating from it. It floated in a straight line and came to a tree where it did 3 little hops and then disappeared around the tree. I finished my business, but didn't have my phone. I did have a flashlight, so thinking it was someone in the trees, I shone the beam through the trees, but nothing reflected back. I turn around to go back and get in the car, and the light thing is dancing around the back of my car, right beside me. I was able to walk up to it and try to touch it. I say try because my hand just touched the car. But the even weirder thing was that when I touched it, my hand created a shadow over the top of it. It was like it had no feeling at all, like just going through air. After it floated around the car, it disappeared around the side, and I lost sight of it altogether. I climbed back in the car for sleep, but was incredibly baffled, and prepped my phone just in case that thing floated through the window. The area where I live is a heavily wooded Indian residential area, and we have no neighbors, and the closest town is about 15 minutes away. The only animals that come around are coyotes, black bears, sometimes wolves, and since I live in the southern part of Canada, there aren't any mountain lions that I've seen anyway. So a few nights ago around 2:50 a.m., I heard my dogs barking like crazy, and I got pretty annoyed by this because they never usually do it. It was hard for me to sleep, and I pulled out my phone to check the time, and like I said, it was almost 3. Since my bedroom has a window, I opened it to call my dogs back, and they didn't stop barking. I tried a few more times, but then I heard a sort of wailing, crying sound from the woods. I heard foxes can sometimes make screaming sounds, but this didn't sound like a fox's cry. I don't think it could have actually been a woman, considering, like I said, that we don't have neighbors. I tried telling my grandfather, but he doesn't hear it, and when I told my grandmother, she didn't want to talk about it since she can sometimes be superstitious. Me and some friends went to an abandoned mental asylum at night, not really expecting much. We busted in through one of the boarded-up windows, and when we were inside, we all heard talking. We figured that other people were there, so we followed the sound. We were walking down the hall and heard a woman whispering, "Why did you take my baby?" over and over again. At this point, I was visibly shaking, and we all believed we found where the sound was coming from originally. We go to this room, and there was a huge cage. It looked like one of those pet carriers, only human-sized. I don't know what actually happened that night. I don't really believe that dead people were talking in there, but the sheer creepiness of it all was just too much. This is a real story in this area. People actually report seeing this. It's a tale that comes from a little town in Lancaster County, a place called Elizabethtown. It's called the Purple Light Bridge, and it's a story that began in the early 1900s. Could be more than a tale, though, since there is proof of the purple light and the tragic incident behind it. So one of the tales is that a young boy is struck by a train on the bridge that intersects between Turnpike and Road Street, which is where the train station for Amtrak is. It supposedly happened in 1934, and some people claim that there is proof of the accident. So after the boy's death, it is said that late at night you can see a purple light on the bridge or in the gorge where the train track ran into from the north heading southwest. People like to argue that you can see the light at another location and that it's been there not only by the train station itself. They claim that you can see the lights under the bridge that is above the train tracks on Bossler Road. Bossler Road, for this purple light, had another tale. A mother brought her son to the bridge, and under that bridge, she hung her son, and then herself. Locals say that the purple light that you see is the mother and the son, as one energy. Some people have claimed that the purple light comes from the moonlight reflecting off of the rocks below. Yet even more people claim that it's actually the bridge a couple miles away in Newville near Elizabethtown. I have not yet tried to investigate, but certainly intend to. For some context, I live in an apartment with 3 other people while we go to college, but it's currently just me until January since the others went back home. I was singing a song that got stuck in my head when I heard whistling from the kitchen at the same time to the same tune. I thought one of the other roommates may have come back early, so I shouted out to them, but didn't get a response. I went to the kitchen, which is only just a few feet from the bathroom, and no one was there or anywhere else in the apartment. I checked the hallway outside, but didn't see anyone or hear a door open and shut in the few seconds that it took for me to get to the door. The whistling was very airy, as if it was someone who couldn't whistle very well. This isn't the first thing that happened to me in the last few weeks, but it's definitely the weirdest. It could just be my imagination, but it sounded like someone was directly outside the bathroom door, whistling toward it. The other thing that happened was far less weird, and could have just been me not paying attention, but I came back from work to find that the lights in my roommate's room were on, and the fan was blowing out at the door. Even though no one had been home, and the other roommates' families live quite a long ways from here. I asked where they were, and all of them sent back replies showing that they were nowhere near the apartment. Ever since I was a kid, I had paranormal experiences. One intense rule of the house my mom gave me was never to participate in a Ouija board. When I was 14 years old, I'm now 20, I let my curiosity get the best of me and decided to do a Ouija board with a friend. In my room in the complete dark, we began the process. To my surprise, nothing happened. Later that night, I let my mind and fear get the best of me and decided to sleep with my mom, who had no clue that I had previously participated in a Ouija board, otherwise she would have killed me. As I was falling asleep, my mom asleep right next to me, I saw the silhouette of a large man in the doorway. At first, I told myself that it was just my brother. I called his name twice, then noticed that this figure was at least 6 inches taller than my brother and completely unresponsive to what I was saying. I started to panic and pray as I realized that this was not my brother, and perhaps something far more evil that I had invited into the house. I was too afraid to move or to wake my mom. After about 5 minutes, though it felt like 10 years, the figure disappeared. I struggled to sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I was getting ready with my mom in the bathroom. Keep in mind that she has no idea what I had seen in her room last night, or even that I had done the Ouija board. She brings up to me a nightmare that she had had the previous night. After I asked her to tell me, the answer brought me to tears. She said that there was a demonic entity in the hallway, and as she went to touch it, it threw her across the room. As I broke down in tears and told her the truth, we proceeded to bless our house. I will never do a Ouija board again. In high school, my friends and I knew a guy named Gene. For whatever reason, Gene had a habit of telling extremely tall tales centered on himself, as if he were trying to make himself look cooler. The most repeated one was his claim that in a nearby ravine, a coven of druids practiced and were schooling him in ancient magic. He always played them straight, as if they were unquestionably true. He never had any evidence. While taking a walk one night, I happened upon a construction site. Being heavily into urban exploration, I explored the heck out of that site and, upon leaving, tipped over their porta potty. I was still a bit immature, and I thought it was funny. After that, whenever I found one, over it went. One day I told some friends about it, and Gene, ever the showman, chimed in with, "Oh, that's nothing. I like to burn them down." Arson was most assuredly not our thing, and we knew that Gene was full of it, so we were just surprised when, calling his bluff, he offered to prove it by showing us the fruits of his labors. 5 of us piled into the car, only one of us had a car, and followed Gene's instructions. The site was in a rural area with lots of big hills and dense forest, common in the Pacific Northwest. At a sharp elbow on a 2-lane road was a gravel turnoff leading maybe 100 feet into the woods to a gravel parking lot. This was the starting point for a number of hiking trails. There were no lights there, and the street light out on the road didn't show very much through the trees. Also, there were no other cars. One of the trails began past a gate that was designed to keep off-roaders from the trails, and it took a sharp left turn from the back of the parking lot. The porta potty had been about 30 feet or so up the trail, and on a later visit by day, we found out that Gene really did burn it into a puddle of blue goo. That night, we didn't make it there. We had a couple of flashlights, and we all started up the trail as a group. As far as I can recall, we never heard any noises, animal or human. We got about halfway to the spot, then all of us stopped walking. Someone whispered, "Do you feel that?" And we all bolted down the trail, piled back into the car, and got the hell out of there. Once on the road, we compared thoughts. I felt what everyone else did. The deepest, most intense, raw fear that I have ever endured. It was like we suddenly faced impending death. It clearly indicated, I need to leave right this instant. I can only guess that there might have been a cougar or something, as they've been known to attack hikers, but we saw and heard absolutely nothing. I've read that if a little voice in your head tells you to do something, it's a good idea to listen. Part of me wonders if Gene's porta potty fire pissed off some forest spirit or something. I've been back to that trailhead a few times during the day to show friends where this happened. I've also brought a friend who's quote-unquote sensitive, as they say, and they didn't pick up anything. I've had a few odd experiences, including seeing a couple of ghosts, some strange lights in the sky several times, and some other stuff. This is the only unexplainable experience that I've had which was deeply scary. My dad and I decided to go to this store one day to buy incense, and we meet this woman that I think owns the shop, and she's weirdly interested in the color of my eyes. My eyes are a weird color, they're yellow and green, but she was telling me that they're so bright that they're deceiving. Well, fast forward to a few weeks later, and I'm in my room asleep. My mom is awake, and when I woke up, she told me that she saw a woman, perfectly described her as the woman from that shop, astral projecting into our house, and went in my room and tried to take me. My mom had never went to that store, had never seen that woman, so that's how I know she wasn't lying. My mom and dad weren't on talking terms at that time. But ever since then, I get really weird nightmares involving her in them, and they occur every night, and I can't get them to stop. They always involve her taking me. I was in Pennsylvania exploring an abandoned mill/factory that had been built in the 1800s, at dusk. I was standing on a pile of limestone cinder blocks surrounded by tall grass and brush, with a tree line about an acre away, just after the sun had set while my friends were inside still. As I was climbing down, I heard a low, guttural growl. Not like a dog's growl, or any type of animal for that matter. It was deep. It had much more bass to it. It was very disturbing and not like anything I have ever heard before. It sounded as if it were very close, but I didn't hear any brush moving. It freaked me out, and I booked it to my friend's house in the dark. I had to have a Ouija board for Christmas. My wife refused to buy one, so I did it anyway. One night when my wife was out, my daughter and I tried to use the board. Nothing. The planchette didn't move at all, or if it did, I could feel my daughter pushing it. As I suspected, it's just a parlor game. Move ahead 2 weeks. While working in the garage on a guitar amplifier that I was building, I had a very strong feeling that I was being watched. As I had spent many hours previously on this project without any sensations, this was disturbing. It got so bad that I couldn't spend more than a minute or so in the garage after the initial encounter without the hairs on my neck going up. Then came the whispers. More like a shh, shh sound, actually. Kind of a be quiet between 2 or more people lurking about. This only happened when entering the garage from the house, and later when my daughter called me at work to say she heard shh, shh when entering the darkened dining room. Since she was alone at the time, I blamed it on the cats. I too experienced it in the house, but usually only when entering the garage itself. Finally, I decided that enough is enough. I went into the garage one night and yelled at whoever was there that they had to leave because they were scaring the crap out of us. No more whispers after that. I wasn't yet into paranormal investigations at the time, so I didn't have a digital audio recorder to leave in the garage overnight. It bothers me now that I had real live spirits in the house to test with, and I didn't have the equipment or the moxie to do anything. Ever since we moved to our new house, I hear someone playing in my son's room when he's outside. Generally, I just wrote it off as something he placed precariously that just fell or something, and then I saw it. Or her, rather. I was sitting on my couch talking with the wife about whatever we were going on about, and when I turned my head back to look at my wife, I saw a little blonde girl in a white dress peeking around the corner of our hall entrance that leads to my son's upstairs room. I immediately asked my wife if she saw it, but of course she was looking at me when it happened. It was basically right behind her. Just the other day, I heard what I thought was my wife calling out, "Hey!" as she was doing laundry. I got up to see what she wanted, and she had no idea what I was talking about, and said that she didn't say anything. And she didn't hear anything either, even though the sound came from the area where she was, at the bottom of the stairs that lead to my son's room. Are there any Android apps or something that can help me communicate with the spirit that I believe is in this house? She seems playful, and sometimes I hear my son playing alone, talking to someone that isn't there, but when I ask him, he says he's just talking to his toys.